busy right now. Yeah. I've got the wireless mic for you. Oh, thank you.
Test, test.
Sorry? So I'll have you off to the side. What do you want me to? Just off to the side. On the side stage. Okay. All right. Hey, Quinn, have they killed the music yet? Are we ready? Quinn, are we ready? I played music for years. I said I played music for years, so it feels so different to have this open, and there's not like. beautiful Washington, D.C., there's some people we have to thank tonight. I had a list. And they gave it to me like a bad kid that doesn't do his homework. All right. First of all, we would like to thank the lovely staff here at Busboys and Poets. Give it up for your servers. Class Unity and DCDSA. Thank you guys very much for helping us out with this. Oh, there's some podcasts we have to thank as well. Varn Vlog, thank you for being a part of this, Derek Varn. Thank you, Derek Varn, for not wearing a kilt tonight. Don't want the beanbag to slip out in front of the young people. The Emancipations Podcast with Daniel Tutt. And I want to send a big shout out to Daniel Tutt for making this all happen, putting this together, convincing me to leave my beautiful place in Mexico to come to DC and experience humidity. And of course, big shout out to a show that maybe some of you have seen. It's a show that I'm on called This is Revolution. It's like they know who we are. So I'm very excited to welcome. I will not introduce you as the Poet Laureate of DC because you said don't do that. But reading an introductory poem is Ethelbert Miller. Please give him a round of applause.
Well, I want to first thank Andy Shallah and his beautiful wife, Marjan. Andy Shallah is the owner of Busboys and Poets, and he's all sitting in the back with his wife, Marjan. I'm going to read a very short poem about CLR James that I wrote back in 1990. And then I'm going to read a short paragraph from a book entitled CLR James, His Life and Work, edited by Paul Buell. This poem is dedicated to Paul Buell. CLR James. I sit next to the old man, surrounded in his bed by books. The television is on, but he has already started asking questions. I try to remember this moment for the rest of my life. I let everything else become history. I'll read this paragraph from this essay I wrote called Black Women Writers, and it gives you a sense of how the poem that I just read, how it started. And this is for CLR James. He stayed not far from where I lived, the Chastleton on 16th Street in Washington. On several occasions, I went to visit him. James was always the same. I would find him in bed, surrounded by books and newspapers, the television always on. Any impression that James was ill was immediately displaced by the conversations that would develop. One could witness his thinking, analyzing, reaching new conclusions about the world, explaining daily events by making references to history. Now and then, I took James' books written by Black American women writers. He was deeply impressed by what they were writing. He felt that the work of Toni Morrison and Ntozake Shange was important. He was moved especially by the novelist Alice Walker. And that's just an excerpt from this essay in this book.
Give me 1 second. Newfangled technology, it's different when it's not a live stream. All right, get the microphone. So, you actually got to know the person we're here to talk about today, CLR James. What year was that when you guys met?
That would probably be around 1970, around 1970.
And that was here in DC?
That was here in DC. At that time, CLR James was teaching a course at Howard University on Pan-Africanism, but he was also employed at the Federal City College, which is now UDC. He was down there at UDC, along with Gil Scott Heron.
Gil Scott Heron was
Gil Scott Heron was also teaching at
so
Federal
it
City
was
College.
you, Gil Scott Heron, and CLR James.
And a whole bunch of other people, too.
Okay. It wasn't like y'all chilling in a
Right,
room.
no,
Okay.
not exactly.
What was it like to be around at that time in D.C.? What was the feeling like in D.C. in 1970?
You know, when I came here, and from New York, South Bronx, I came here in 1968, you know, meeting CLR James in 1970. I always tell people that I was baptized by blackness here when I came.
That's easy to say because I live in Mexico and totally forgot this was a very chocolatey city.
Right.
And I was reminded by your airport
Right.
how black it is. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful city.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you know, if you go back to 1968, this area right here was where you had the serious riots that took place after Martin was assassinated. And so when you look at, you know, King's assassination, Robert Kennedy's assassination, you look at the Tet Offensive of 1968, you look at a major student protest at Howard University. One of the demands was creation of Afro-American Studies Department.
Okay.
And so, you know, I was one of the first graduates in that department, you know. And when you talk about the people that influenced my life, CLR James was one of them. The other was Leon DeMoss, you know, which is one of the founders of Negritude. So when you think about this being a very important city in terms of blackness, it's not just chocolate, you know, it's like a really, you know, dark chocolate.
Is there a bit of a Pan-Africanism in D.C., much like New York, where you're from?
Well, you know, if you walk across the campus of Howard University, you see the diaspora. I remember you walk across the campus and the students from West Indies were playing, you know, soccer. You know, you are in a class with somebody from Nigeria, Kenya, you know, let alone the people from Newport News in Philadelphia. So when you see that in terms of black people from all around the world, you leave Howard University with a certain commitment to African American people. You know, you're not surprised that there are black people in Mexico. You're not surprised that there are black people, you know, in Ecuador, because you're introduced to somebody like that maybe at Howard University.
Have you been back to Howard anytime recently?
Well,
Does
that's
it have the same
interesting.
feeling?
That's a very
you know?
interesting feeling.
Because this is a different time for black higher education as well when we're talking about the 70s.
Right.
So do you think that falls off a bit in the 80s?
You
as
asked
a
very sensitive question.
wasn't trying to.
Since you have access to Google, I was dismissed from Howard University in 2015.
Really?
Yes, and that had a lot to do with what you see happening around many businesses and organizations. Ageism. You know, I'll be 75 next year. You know, when you look at many budget cuts, many times it's people who are older, you know, who wind up losing their jobs.
Yeah.
And what happens is that at that time, the president, I won't mention his name, was saying, well, oh, Ethelbert, that's a how could that happen to you? The reason for that is that my writing name is E. Ethelbert Miller. If you're in HR at Howard University, it's Eugene Miller.
Okay.
Say, and I got laid off with 80 other people.
Well.
Okay? But I was the only person that the president called to apologize out of 80-something people. Okay. And that was only because I had a public, you know, I had a public face. And I say that in terms of one, when I never went back because I felt there was many people who were friends of mine who got laid off at the same time. You know, and when you talk about like a CLR James, you're concerned about people.
Okay.
Okay. You know, when you look at CLR James, James had a real influence on Walter Rodney. Okay?
Yes.
If you think of Walter Rodney, one of his small books, Grounding with My Brothers, you know, where he's actually working with the Rastafarian community. If you're around people like that, and now you're working at Howard University, which is like the black middle class maybe, but there are people who are working in the cafeterias, there are people who are, you know, in the dorms, you know, cleaning, who pretty much, you know, hopefully maybe they can send a kid to Howard University. But if you're not speaking to them, if you're not realizing, okay, I'm going to graduate from this school with skills, but who am I going to serve? Okay, so maybe there's a person that, you know, that you will meet at Howard University who is in the cafeteria, who really you say, okay, well, you know, I learned a lot outside the classes. I learned much in the cafeteria where this person was serving me food than anybody else.
In closing, I know you don't, you know, weren't ready for the Q&A aspect of it, right? You didn't know it was coming.
I didn't know what was happening.
Yeah. Surprise.
I thought it was just read one poem and leave.
No. No one escapes these questions.
Okay, thank you. You're in the high chair.
Well, there's a reason.
Okay.
I got ego
All
problems.
right. Okay.
Seriously, in closing, what is the importance of CLR James today in this current moment? 4 years after George Floyd's summer, we're looking at another election that'll probably have a low turnout. What are we looking at? What should we look to with CLR James and some of his teachings?
I think we could look at, I just read a little excerpt, from a book, and I mentioned CLR James was very much interested in what the women writers were doing, okay? Alice Walker, Ntozake Shanyi, Toni Morrison. I think he would be really impressed in terms of Mexico electing a woman president. I think he would be concerned about that. I think he would be concerned definitely about the situation in Haiti today, in terms of gangs. I think he would also be concerned about how we interpret Pan-Africanism, okay? So to the point that, should we look to Kenya to send police to Haiti? Okay, it's a very interesting question. Okay.
Let me interrupt you a little bit.
Right.
You've piqued my interest with your parting answer. What is the problem with Pan-Africanism today, in your opinion? Because there's a lot of genocide, if you will, going on over there that doesn't get the attention.
Well, I'm a writer, so my concern is with language. To me, I'm surprised that Pan-Africanism isn't used more frequently. Because what happens is we have the sense of the internet. We're no longer connected. Well, there's another word, for example, I think that perhaps falls out of use. That's a diaspora. Well, we're not really that dispersed. If, for example, I can take my phone right now and talk to somebody who's overseas. Yeah. Okay, so you can see that at one time, we were talking about, slavery, we were talking about the Black Atlantic, but these divisions no longer occur. If we say, okay, the technology is moving at this pace, are we moving at that
Well,
pace?
it's just like Charlie Chaplin in The Great Communicator at the end. He gives that speech, the telephone and the airplane have connected us more than ever, but we're so disconnected. Do you feel that way about today and the internet? Do you feel we're still a little disconnected?
Well, I'll link this back to CLR James. The last time I saw CLR James, it was in London. Okay? And that was the whole connection with Race Today there, that darkest hour. CLR James was talking about one person, Michael Jackson.
Okay.
That's all he was talking. He said, Michael Jackson is amazing. When we talk about CLR James today, one of the things we should not forget is CLR James' interest in popular culture, okay? Whether it's Michael Jackson or whether he has an interest in cricket, okay? And can show these connections in sport. I have a love for baseball, and my whole thing is looking at the politics of baseball, okay? And you can see how international baseball has become in terms of Japanese presence now. Okay, you can also talk about how people say, oh, there's not that many black people playing baseball.
There's not.
That's not true. There's not that many black people speaking English playing baseball.
Agreed. Yeah.
You see, so what happens?
So does baseball have the same problem, and I say problem in quotations, that a lot of people say basketball has? There's no good white American players. There's no black American players that are coming out.
No, what we see right now, you look at the playoffs, the basketball is international.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happens now when you look at who's won the MVPs the last couple of years, okay, they're not necessarily African Americans dominating the sports, okay? The same way, for example, now, and this gets back to CLR James, if we can follow sports,
yes.
Okay, he was following cricket, if we follow baseball, we follow Caitlin Clark, we follow what women are doing, then you have a good understanding of what's happening in terms of business,
yes.
What's happening in terms of politics,
yes.
It's all connected. When you look at a CLR James, he's an individual of that type of public intellectual who's looking at everything. I have friends of mine who are on the left, progressive. They don't even want to go to a baseball game.
It's horrible.
Or they think that, Taylor Swift, I don't want to listen to her. I don't want to. No, you want to listen to that because you want to know what people are listening to. What I was always concerned about when I was here in 68, 69, I would meet somebody on the street, they would give me the quote, their progressive, newspaper.
Yeah.
And I always looked them back, I said, but there's no sports page. The workers are always talking about the game, So I was like saying, okay, where's the sports page? And then when you look at that, someone like a CLR James, you know that he was really like a sports writer before he was really doing anything dealing with like the history of Pan-African revolts or Black Jacobins. So I don't know how many people out here enjoy cricket, but there was just a big upset.
Is there any cricket fans in the audience?
There we go.
Bullshit. You don't watch that shit. You don't. Spencer might, because he's a fucking glutton. But I watched a cricket match when I was on tour in the UK, and they were talking about the hats of the women in the crowds. Like, that's how long those matches last.
But look at how we're sitting here, and we had this big upset where the U.S. defeated Pakistan.
In cricket?
In cricket.
I didn't know the U.S. had a team. Do you play for the U.S. team? Are you the guy? No? You could lie to me and say you fucking scored the thing. And I'd be like, okay. And I'd brag about the cricket guy here. What would CLR James say about the Kendrick Lamar-Drake beef? That's what we really want to know.
What do I want to say about that?
I'm effing with you. You don't have to answer that question. Please give a big round of applause for effing. You gonna go out of the way? Yeah. You help out? Yeah. Hey, thank you so much. So there's a person that's coming on stage right now that I've been talking to for the last about 4 or 5 years, and I never met him in real life. I've yelled at him a lot in private, but never in real life. And yesterday I picked him up from the airport. Maybe it's because I'm getting old. I got all misty-eyed when I saw him. And then we've just been having the greatest time hanging out. I introduce him the same way. I'm gonna introduce him this way if you watch my show. Please welcome my homie, my dog, the man of the Mau Mau Hour, the Pascal Robert. Give it.
To be here. Thank you, Washington, D.C. Thank you.
When we started this thing, did you think we were going to be able to convince these white people to send us to D.C.?
I knew that. I was like, I've been running for black agenda report. I don't talk to white people.
Real quick, just to fuck with people, I don't mind saying this live. Remember when we started, like, nobody watched the show. I still don't think that many people watched the show. And I had interviewed a guy named Doug Lane. Maybe you guys know who Doug Lane is. And at the time, he was running a publishing company called Zero Books. And Doug was going through some stuff. And he goes, "Can you give me one show a week?" And I said, "Fuck yeah, I can give you one show a week. We got like 12 people watching, and you have a lot more than 12. And so I hit Pascal up, and I was like, and I don't know if you remember this. I was like, "Pascal, Zero Books wants to run our show." And Pascal was like, "Nah, fuck that, man. Don't trust these crackers, man." Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I remember that.
And it helped out tremendously.
It did. That's when I said I got to trust Jason on the administrative decisions when it comes to the show, because that made a big difference.
And then we did the majority report and all that other shit.
Yeah, we gained a lot of notoriety really quick on the Bernie left and the non-Bernie left. And
what do you really call them?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that was important to me was that we were able to still make legitimacy with my original audience, which were by basically using TIR as a way to expose black folk to their socialist traditions that have often been ignored in the United States. And as I tell people all the time, one of the things that motivated me to want to do a podcast is that I was so absolutely enraged at how the black professional managerial class amongst the liberal chattering class i.e. thank you, Ta-Nehisi Coates, thank you, Joyanne Reed, thank you, all those other folks, were trying to convince black people that it was the socialists that were the racists like Bernie Sanders, but that Hillary Clinton, super predator comment, was the woman who was the friend of the black. And I'm old enough to remember the politics of the Clintons, and I still pride myself on saying I've never voted for a Clinton in my life. And I'm very proud of that, because I have always recognized the sheer sham of their third way politics and the damage that they did not only to black folk, but to the working class communities all over this country with the neoliberalization of their policies, NAFTA, GATT, and all those things. Now, this is obviously a deviation from what the topic of the show is, but the point I'm trying to say is that all of, I'm 55 years old, and I feel like I'm dating myself, but the travesty of democratic centralism has been the politics of most of my adult life. And seeing the concept of socialism and communism appeal to black people, which started with me writing with Black Agenda Report, which was a heralding back to the tradition of my uncles, because those of you who know and watch the show, I have two uncles who studied in the Soviet Union, who left Haiti to study in the Soviet Union, then they were MLs. So I have that political tradition in my family, but it was with working with Bruce Dixon and Glenn Ford and those guys where the real political education came in. And when I saw how those liberals were trying to divorce black folk from that tradition in this country, when you look at people like Hubert Harrison, and you look at people like Claudia Jones and all of these other luminary figures, the Black Panther Party, even not going back before the Panthers, you look at the black socialists and communists of the early 20th century and during the Comintern, Paul Robeson, all of them. It was tragic to me that this con job of what black politics has in terms of its options was being presented through the media, and I felt that what TIR offered was an opportunity to present a corrective to that narrative. And I think that some of my proudest work on TIR has been trying to offer that corrective. But that's not...
See that nigga? It's Marcus.
Oh, okay, thanks, Marcus. Marcus started our collective. But that's not what we're here to talk about.
That's not what we're here to talk about. You have a bone to pick with CLR James and his book, Black Jacobins. And you've had this bone to pick with CLR James since we met.
Yes.
And you disagree with some of the things that were written in there, especially his portrayal of Toussaint Louverture.
Yes.
And you'd like to read something from there?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm actually working on a book project on the mythology of Toussaint Louverture. But the actual title of the book is Jean-Jacques Dessalines versus Toussaint Louverture, the danger of the mythology and its consequence for political thought. But first of all, my comments will be limited to CLR James' text on the Haitian Revolution and some of the common fallacies that existed at the time around the personality of Toussaint Louverture, and how James, failing to view the revolution as a revolution from below, contradicted some of his own socialist inclinations at the time. We have to understand that though Black Jacobins is viewed today as CLR James' definitive work, it is in no way the pinnacle of most of his life as a leftist. The Black Jacobins was published in 1938 in 1938 and written in 9 months. And even CLR James, in the opening to the last edition, that's not until 1962, admitted that the book reaches its peak popularity as a post-colonial or anti-colonial polemic, which it does a great job of being. But the key is, the book is a polemic. It's not a history book. The problem I have with the Black Jacobins is not that it fails as an anti-colonial polemic, it's that it's read as a history of the Haitian Revolution, which it's not. It's a polemic, it's an anti-colonial polemic using the Haitian Revolution as a metaphor, and in many ways, if you read the book, it almost seems like he's making an analogy between the Haitian Revolution and the Russian Revolution, using Louverture as his Lenin and using Dessalines as his Stalinist bête noire, in terms of how he actually views the two and how he meets the two.
Why is that problematic to you?
It's problematic because my argument is that Toussaint Louverture was not a revolutionary. And
Why?
never had,
Why?
because would a revolutionary put in his constitution that he wants to maintain the transatlantic slave trade?
I mean, it's a different time.
But the thing is, though, in the context of the fact that people view Toussaint Louverture as a freedom fighter, and the fact that he never fought against French colonial power in his life. He didn't fight the Spanish for an independent Haiti. He fought the Spanish to protect the French colony. He didn't fight the British to protect an independent Haiti. He fought the British to protect the French colony. Toussaint Louverture never had any inclination, though the United States tried to push him in that direction, never had any inclination to have an independent Haiti in his life. All he wanted to do was to have a blackface in high place, manage colonialism, with him as general chief for life, under the name Saint-Domingue, reporting to France, but breaking the exclusive. The exclusive was the policy that required Saint-Domingue, which is the name of pre-revolutionary Haiti, to trade exclusively with the French. And what he was trying to do was expand the exclusive and include the British and the Americans. So this is a consequence of his, and I would also argue, does it make sense for a revolutionary to re-invite ancien regime whites? What does that mean? What does ancien regime white plantation owners? The ancien regime white plantation owners were so conservative, these were the plantation owners who were against the French Revolution. When he's inviting whites back to the island, it's not the whites who are fighting in favor of the French Revolution. No. The problem with Toussaint Louverture is that he likes pre-revolutionary French colonial aristocracy. What he's trying to implement in Haiti is basically black-faced feudalism. And don't forget, in France, before the French Revolution, it was a feudal society. The corvée system, which is the system of labor that he had, the docile Africans, the Africans, and one of the things that CLR James does, he does mention that there is a Creole. And by the way, I don't want to lay this all on the footsteps of Toussaint Louverture. This is a large consequence of the fact that the historiography of the Haitian Revolution has traditionally been bastardized because there is an intentional denial of the role of class among the black figures in the Haitian Revolution, though Toussaint Louverture does correct that between the quote-unquote mixed race peoples, or what they call the mulattoes, even though that's a pejorative term. I hate that we have to use that. and the Creole blacks, the point of the matter is that even that categorization represents that the class division with the mulattoes wasn't just based on, oh, they were just light-skinned blacks who were better because they were light-skinned. It's because it was the light-skinned blacks of the South, because the political economy of their area was not based on agriculture as much as it was based on trade. And because they were more proximate to white skin, they were more effective traders than the black colonial generals, who were Creole blacks like Toussaint Louverture, who were more interested in maintaining the plantation aristocracy.
And you think CLR James misses this in Black Jacobins?
I think he doesn't miss this because it's an intentional flaw. I don't think he misses it. I don't want to say he misses it. I don't think he focuses enough on the class differentiation and how much Toussaint Louverture's project. I mean, there's literally a line in the Black Jacobins when CLR James says the actual contents of Toussaint Louverture's Constitution is irrelevant. I was like, how is that irrelevant? It basically tells you what the ideological template of what this guy was thinking is in terms of his position on the country. And not only that, he says these things kind of giving Toussaint cover. The fact that Toussaint brings back ancien regime whites who were white plantation owners, he says they were needed because they had better understanding of how the plantations worked.
Well, I'm going to ask you to hold that there because we have to bring in some whites of our own. It's okay to laugh. So we want to bring up the rest of the panel now. They have some things that they want to say about Toussaint. Dude, Jeff Kennedy's right there, look.
Oh, what's Jeff?
Just look at Jeff. Give it up to Jeff Kennedy. DC's own. All the stars are in the crowd tonight. Who else is out there? I can barely see. Well, please welcome, coming all the way from Philadelphia. You may know him from his role in the Platypus Society. You may know him from Sublation Media. Please welcome Spencer Leonard.
Spencer.
Spence, sit in the big chair, sit in the big chair.
Sit next to a
That's the OG chair. That's the OG chair.
Next to the guy you're going to be disagreeing with.
Okay. You may know him as the meanest man on the left. I know him as my friend Derek. Please welcome Derek Varn. Toussaint calls him my stunt double. This wonderful man has filled in for me when I'm trying to live my very, very chaotic life. Please welcome Billy Buntin. Where do you want to sit? You want to sit? Okay, sit there. And a big fat shout out to the man that actually put all of this together, that is letting us stay at his house. The Daniel Tutt. You still got a good shot, Quinn? You got all in the shot? Now, we're live streaming this as well, which was a massive headache, and I won't get into that. But for the people that are watching on the live stream, you guys can send questions in, and Quinn will let me know what the questions are. Please don't drop the camera. Okay, I trust you. I love you like a play cousin. So we'll start off with you, Spencer. You have some things you want to say about CLR James. Coming in behind Pascal's very hot takes. Do you agree with anything Pascal said, or do you disagree vehemently before we get into your, I don't even want to say it.
I disagree with I mean, I've once heard Pascal say that he doesn't think of the Haitian Revolution as a part of the global French Revolution. And that may be how you understand it, but I think we have to be fair to CLR James in saying that that is how he understands it. And it really gets to the question of the most controversial part of James, perhaps, which is his Trotskyism. He wrote at the same time a book on world revolution, 1917 to 1936. Wrote it at exactly the same time. Also wrote a book called A History of Negro Revolt, which has been republished as a history of Pan-African struggle, or I think maybe Pan-African revolt. And in those works, I mean, I think it's very clear that if the accusation of, recent decades is someone is a Eurocentric, CLR James is a Eurocentric, right? And he thinks that the stakes are in Europe in the 18th century, and he certainly thinks that the stakes are in Europe in 1936-37. I mean, his book, World Revolution, really doesn't take any cognizance of any other part of the world other than Europe, including America, to a large degree. He thinks that the decimation of European socialism is a world historic event in his time. And I think he's right. I mean, I do think he's right, I guess, substantively as a historian. I think that the fate of the Haitian Revolution is bound up with the fate of European power in the Atlantic. I mean, Haiti is not going to develop an independent navy, right, in the 18th century. It's not, right? Its trade relations, its entire position in the global economy is going to be dependent upon, the dominant Atlantic powers. And I think that it's a mistake to, this is the last thing I'll say critical of Pascal. I will say, by the way, Pascal knows more than I do. I mean, I certainly will defer to him at that level, but I've read the book and I'm sympathetic with the impetus behind it, and I think it is a historian's work. All of the flaws that Pascal points out in terms of the internal dynamics of leadership within Haiti, you may very well be right about. I certainly could not gainsay that. But I think the broader point is that he is a historian. It is an 18th century book. He starts his history of Negro revolt with it. His chapter, and it's a historical book. It starts, in the 18th century, and it comes up to the 20th century, and it starts with Haiti. It's not a book about the Russian Revolution. It's not a book about Stalin and Lenin. It's a book about bourgeois revolution, and how people of African descent participated in the bourgeois revolution in the 18th century. He also would point out the same thing about the American Revolution, which, of course, triggered a wave of abolition across the northern states. He's very clear about that. So that's what I would say to Pascal. It's not anything about what I prepared to say.
Pascal, I do have to let him get a real quick. Do you call the Haitian Revolution a bourgeois revolution?
I actually would argue that first of all, that number one, Toussaint Louverture did not fight in the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution doesn't start until 1802 when he's captured and moved to France. Toussaint Louverture, as CLR James probably titled his book, led the Saint-Domingue Revolution against Britain and Spain for France. He led a colonial revolution to benefit his colonial power, which is France, because his number one goal as even 18th and 19th century slave masters, I have quotes stated, was to preserve a system, an economic model that did not challenge the political economy of slavery, but improved upon it in a way that they could trust certain blacks to manage. That's a fact. And if that makes him some kind of revolutionary in anyone's mind, Eric Ruffin, who was one of the premier intellectuals during the Civil War, he wrote a book called The Political Economy of Slavery. Literally was one of the original white men who shot at the commencement of the Civil War. Wrote of Toussaint Louverture that he is the only man amongst the blacks who should be praised because he knew how to manage their political economy and plantations to profit. If this is a man that people think should be the hero of black folk, which is what I'm talking about, good luck with that.
Well, let's give the mic back to Spencer.
So the thing that I wanted to address was CLR James in America on what he would have called the Negro question, right?
You want to address the Negro question?
He wrote all about it. He had a column called The Negro Question, right, in Socialist Appeal. We would, in the 60s, they would have called it the Black Question. It's the question of the integration of the American working class in the struggle for socialism, right? It's a question, in other words, it's the issue of race as a class problem, as our mentor, who's not here, Adolf Reed, would put it.
And we do have to say, sorry about that. Adolf could not make it. He did get sick and could not make it out. So if everybody, I don't want to say thoughts and prayers, what do we say to Adolf? He's fine? Well, I mean, he's also not a young man. So send some good thoughts Adolf's way, please.
And so what I would say is that the aspiration of American socialism, going back to Eugene Debs, is a multiracial American working class movement for socialism. And Eugene Debs is the father of American Marxism. He's the leading Marxist of the Second International Marxist Party in this country. It's not true that America didn't have a Marxism. Britain didn't have a Marxist party. America did, right? America did. And he was very clear that the internationalism of socialism applied to everyone, and says clearly that if this is not, if we don't attract the workers of all races in the United States, we don't deserve the name of a socialist party. And I think that that's, I know that there was an industry in, amongst black separatists and black nationalists in the 1960s and 70s of attacking Debs' statement on those grounds as themselves being racist. And I think that at the end of the day, when we're talking about do we want socialism in the world, we're talking about do we want socialism in the United States? Because we ain't gonna get it in the world until we get it in the United States, right? This is the center of world capitalism, right? And we're going to have to crack that nut, right? We want a revolutionary integrationist project to overthrow capitalism.
Does the race question, though, make that such a difficult task in your mind?
Well, this is what James addresses. So CLR James comes to the United States in 1938, and he he's a Trotskyist already. He became a Trotskyist in Great Britain, and he came to this country, as I understand it, at the urging of Leon Trotsky himself. And within a short period, he goes to Mexico and meets with Trotsky. And they address a number of things. And he had written the masterpiece of Trotskyism in the English language at that time, right? World Revolution. That it digests, all of the writings of the left opposition, Trotsky's and others, for an English-speaking audience. And he goes down and he speaks to Trotsky, and Trotsky may not have been very good on the black question. Like a lot of Europeans who were flooding into the communist movement in the United States, there were waves of immigrants from Europe, from fleeing fascism, et cetera. There were increasing numbers of communists in this country who were from Europe. They were tempted to view the black question in the United States as a problem of national self-determination, right? On the model of the Jewish question, or perhaps more relevantly, the old Polish question going back into the 19th century, the Irish question, this sort of thing. And James he's pushing on that, and it's a problem for the American Trotskyists. His writings in 1939, 1940 are waffling on the question of, how do we mobilize, because the SWP, his party, like the Communist Party, is disproportionately white, and within that, disproportionately non-native American, disproportionately immigrant. And his argument is we need to set up a bureau on the Negro question that takes as much of our energy as we dedicate to the trade union question, right? Which of course is a regular feature in the newspaper. We need to appeal intellectually, even if we don't have a large black cadre. There were some black cadre. And we're going to win them over with our Marxism, as he says. And he's quite clear that it's not about attracting, black members necessarily. He says maybe we have to set up an intermediate organization, because it's going to be set up anyway that just addresses, black questions relating to Jim Crow laws, relating to segregation, relating to discrimination, relating to chauvinism as expressed in different civil society domains. But that the ultimate aspiration, of course, is a party that looks like America. And of course, black people would be at the heart of the American working class.
Can I ask you a question? Here we are, so many decades later, from this proposed Negro question.
Yep.
How do you think CLR James would look at the Negro question this many years later?
I don't know. I was intrigued by the poet who knew him personally, remarking on his fascination with Michael Jackson. I think the world has changed a lot.
Yeah.
It's changed a lot since the 1930s. It's changed a lot since the 1960s and 70s. And I think that, and of course we live in a situation now where, the question of the oppression of black people in the United States is, as Pascal rightly pointed out, used by capitalist politics.
Yes.
Right, it's used against the left. We all remember when the BLM supporters jumped up and took the
black
mic.
agenda. Well, that's why I asked that question, because it becomes this thing of, well, Senator Sanders, what is your black agenda? And I wrote about this in Sublation magazine and other places about how I feel that that was a bit of a kneecapping even of the left. So how does this Negro question become a left question that we can ask comfortably, because it also feels uncomfortable when you really ask it?
I think, I mean, to me, there's not a, again, I'll channel Adolf, right? There's not a left in America, there are only leftists, right? There are people like this, right? They're intellectually minded, largely petty bourgeois people. There's no mass movement for socialism in the United States. There's not even the glimmer of a hope of one right now. So I think that it's possible that this question, right? And of course it's not just the 30s.
Yeah.
Right, it's the whole history of the American, call it revolution, right? Going all the way back, right? There have always been questions of slavery and racism in the United States, and the left has always dealt with that, right? Maybe never again, right? I would say that we really don't know, right? It could be the case, like so many things inherited from the history of the left, that a re-emergent left would look different without having resolved the questions of the past. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, none of the questions of socialism from the past are resolved. And we don't have any answers.
Have the liberals answered those questions in their own way with, for example, the Negro question gets answered with DEI in the liberal sense? Is that a problem? How do we stop the liberal answer to that question?
Like, what's his name? Coleman Hughes?
Coleman Hughes.
Coleman Hughes, like, he'll advance like a classical liberal integrationist perspective, right? Color blindness.
Yeah.
That's accused of being racist. Right? People on the right will accuse identity politics of being racist, right? It's a vast, confused situation. I think that, reason why I would invoke Michael Jackson or something like that is that there are generations of Americans who, despite all of the cultural pressures towards segregation, don't care, right? This issue has changed. It changed in my generation. It was different in the 80s.
Yeah.
Obviously. And it was different with the millennials. And there's yet another generation now. And they want to be friends and have sex with each other. I'm fine with that, but nevertheless, the history does haunt us, right? And that's why James is important.
Well, do you think, before we move on, I do want to ask you this question, and this is something that we say on TIR quite a bit. I know you say you didn't coin the phrase and you clear the sample, but Black Power succeeded culturally where it failed politically. And that cultural victory, do you think that also clouds trying to ask and answer the Negro question?
I mean, I don't know. I do think that, again, I would agree with Adolf Reed that the black, what he calls black particularism, became a mode of reconstituting capitalism in the 1960s and 70s, right? Despite the obvious intentions and brilliance and insights of many of those intellectuals and political leaders, for instance, in the Black Panther Party, the long-term legacy of that, right? I mean, my congressman when I lived in Hyde Park was a Black Panther, right? Was a former Black Panther. It was used to reconstitute capitalist politics. And like I said, it is used, and Pascal rightly said, for 30 years, right? They have used the race question as a cudgel against the left.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a particular kind of Clintonian neoliberal, hatchet that they come after you with. So I don't really have an opinion about culture per se, but I will say that I think it goes hand in hand with rotten Democratic Party politics.
Fair enough.
And multiculturalism as reproduced in the political sphere.
Give it up for Spencer Leonard. Moving on down the line to my good friend, fellow honorary black guy every so often, because you look like Sean King.
That's why I grew my hair out.
Don't work, Sean. You can't fool us. Sean, Derek, you want to ask us. You want to talk today about CLR James and state capitalism.
I do, yeah. I mean, one of the interesting developments of CLR James is the development of the Johnson Forrest tendency, which breaks with Trotskyism in 1948 to 50. The theory of state capitalism is generally associated with left communists, Bordiga, and anarchists, and he tried to lay out a framework which made it make sense as a critique not just of the Soviet Union, but also of Trotskyist failure to deal with it. His particular ire was aimed at a particular Trotskyist named Pablo, who he thought removed the substance of the deformed worker state thesis, which for Trotsky was primarily about a bureaucratic emergence of a kind of subclass that developed in response to the ownership of property by the state. Now, he says that Trotskyism gave up its theoretical justification. Thank you. He says that Trotskyism gave up its theoretical justification for, thank you.
Just talking to the mic, dude. It's not going to bite you.
I hate mics. He says that Trotskyism gave up its theoretical justification because of its focus on property relations and not relations of production, which is what he was critiquing the Soviet Union for doing as well. He became very, very anti-bureaucratic. Now, there are lots of clear critiques of this. One is what element of capitalism he thinks is actually dominant in the Soviet Union. I just was literally this morning going back through state capitalism and the world revolution, and he's not exactly clear on what he thinks the particular element is, but he says that Marxist-Leninism totally gives up on empowering the working class itself, and that it's focused on property relations, not relations of production, for that very reason. And so he also accuses the Trotskyist movement of losing the goal here, that the goal is the empowerment of workers, regardless of their nationality, etc., and that this empowerment is been totally abandoned, not just by the Soviet Union, but also by Trotskyists themselves by accepting the terms of the debate. This is what drives pretty much his entire politics between, say, 1950 and probably until his death. He does see, however, unlike many other people in the kind of post-Trotskyist movement and the Marxist humanist movement, which he helps found, that he starts arguing for the necessity of a proletarian versus a bourgeois nationalism. There's a couple of really interesting theoretical things that he's doing, and I think Daniel can talk about this a little more himself, where he sees the class character of the ideas involved as dominating the situation. So one of the things he's doing is that he's looking at the situation of the Soviet Union, and he comes up with a theoretical framework where he says, okay, we're gonna agree with Bukharin's thesis that the early 20th century is monopoly capitalist, and that social democracy in its ideological framework represents the management of monopoly capital. But monopoly capital is transitioning for him into state capitalism. And he sees the Marxist-Leninists as the managers of state capital, and that he actually says that unlike the Trotskyists who view the Marxist-Leninists as incoherent, that we should actually take the Marxist-Leninists as coherent, but that they're trying to justify the exploitation of workers in the Soviet Union. Now, also in this time though, this brings up the kind of interesting position of James as both a defender of European culture, like Spencer says, but also a third worldist, which he is after 1948. For those of you who don't know, James was originally from Trinidad, and this is very important to his formulations. But he starts seeing that the development of workers' revolution in the third world may be a way around this kind of bureaucratic tendency of both, he sees both in the European left and in the American left as dominating the situation of organization. And so he starts positing with Grace Lee Boggs and Ruta Donetskaya that they need to break with the Trotskyist movement. In the book that I read, he's still trying to save the Fourth International, but he's trying to break them free of this idea that they need bureaucratic management of the workers, and that the primary concern should be empowering workers themselves, not property relations, not bureaucratic management, etc. Yeah, we're all getting fucked up with the mic.
Yeah. Well, it all starts with you, just remember that. You guys know it's true. Do you think this is the problem with socialism in one country, in your own opinion?
Well, he thinks this was a problem with socialism in one country, but he doesn't just think that's the only problem. He thinks that this is all emerging as a way to justify the stagnation of the Soviet Union, because he's particularly talking about both two things. One, he tries to base this in the declining rates of profit, everyone's favorite Marxist, theory that eventually...
You want to explain that real quick?
Yes, I guess I can explain that. There's a theory that basically market competition plus efficiency brought on by machinery will lower the profit rate, although no one really agrees on how you measure the profit rate. We'll just note that right there. To the point that it will immiserate the workers and they will rise up in revolution. And he says that basically the Soviet Union gives that up. He goes after Paul Sweezy, the kind of famous theorist of monopoly capital in the 1940s and 50s, for justifying this division. He also goes after Leonard, the Soviet economist, for also doing the same thing. And he says that basically they're giving up on the idea of declining rates of profits so that they can justify trying to exploit the workers more in the Soviet Union and in Yugoslavia. And he uses Yugoslavia as a case study for why this is a capitalistic formation. Now, I can talk about the problems with this if you want me to, but that is what breaks him with the Trotskyist movement. He also talks about how deformed worker states, which is an idea in Trotskyism for those who don't know, that these states come from legitimate workers' revolutions but fail to cast off the bureaucratic element. And initially he says that Trotsky says this is because they're focused on the state ownership of property. But he eventually condemns the entire Trotskyist movement for focusing on property as well because of this distinction. Now, for those of you who don't know, if you think Trotskyists are fractious, Marxist humanists are even more fractious. They were never more than, during the high point of the Johnson Forrest tendency, they were probably 70 people. And they kept splitting over this development. And the other thing they split over was the relationship that workers should have to the third world. And one of the interesting things about CLR James, and I can stop here, is that he tries to create a third worldism that is not hostile to the American or European world, that is just separate from that. And this leads to the focus on the black community as the advanced part of the proletariat as opposed to the white community. This leads to a focus on the developing world, etc. But he also would say, for example, that he was a European black, which I don't know what that means. But he would say stuff like this, like he was not a condemner of European culture or the European workers movement, nor was he a condemner of American culture and American workers movement. I mean, he pulled from non-Marxist socialists from this. He was a particular fan of Oswald Spengler. And when most people like Oswald Spengler, audience, you should run for the fucking hills. But he thought that we could talk about the civilizational politics, and he wrote a book called American Civilization, which is fascinating in his later life, to kind of posit that this was not separate from his concerns about the third world and developing third world nationalism. He seemed to think that proletarian nationalism was needed and that this would lead to internationalism, and this was part of why he never abandoned Lenin, unlike certain other people in the Marxist humanist movement. Now, for a lot of people, you're probably listening to me and going like, what the fuck does this matter? These were the primary debates in the Trotskyist movement against the Marxist-Leninist movement in the 1950s, and particularly since the Forrest Johnson tendency left, although it started splitting, I think the first split's like in 1953, so it doesn't last very long.
Forrest Johnson tendency.
The Forrest Johnson tendency is named for Freddie Forrest, which was Ruta Donetskaya's American pseudonym, and Johnson, which was CLR James' American pseudonym. So they combined their theory when they split with the Fourth International in 1950 and created the tendency. They tried to stay in the Fourth International in the late 40s, but by 1950 they decided that there was no going forward there and split with the movement entirely. Yes.
Pascal, did you want to say anything to what Derek had to say?
Man, I hate left sectarianism. You have no idea. I hate left sectarianism. Listen, let me ask the audience, how stupid do all of these arguments sound to you?
Well,
listen.
Go ahead.
To me, this is a bunch of nerds in their room reading a lot of theory who never met a working class conversation with a person about what their union or non-union is doing to mess with their income and their fees. I mean, working class people are interested about what their bosses are talking about.
So you're a reformist then, Pascal?
Wow. Why does that mean, time out, why does that mean he's a reformist?
Because the primary concern that working class people need to meet their immediate needs, which makes total fucking sense.
Do you think that anything you said as a person that is a working class person would be listen? If we were in a bar, we're going to go to a bar in a matter of minutes. And if we were at that bar and you sat down next to someone and you said a third of the things, do you think that person would look at you and be like, yeah, right on? Or do you think he'd look at you and be like, fuck did you say?
Let's actually put this in historical context. You live in a post-1992 context. This
Sure.
is not a live question for you, right? The Soviet Union's already failed, and everybody was wrong about how it was going to fail.
Sure.
Right? But if you're in 1950, when people who are literally making policy decisions about what workers do, you might go, this is a bunch of nerds. And yes, this is a very professional class debate of you have to be educated to engage in it. But these are people who are trying to intervene in state policy for actually existing workers.
But this is the thing. One of the theories that one of the things that I find interesting about CLR James is that CLR James, as this tendency you're talking about, the post-Johnson Forrest tendency, his advocacy was that we need to stop the management of the petit bourgeois over the affairs of the working class.
Correct.
That he believed that every single mother can lead, that every worker can govern, and that the notion that we need to have professional managers negotiating politics for the proletariat is the problem. All right? So that to me, those were some of his most radical ideas. Now, many people confuse, and also he posed the challenge to the nation state, and that he basically argued and said that the nation state is a hierarchy of oppression, for the exact reason that what the nation state does is concentrate power in the hands of petit bourgeois managers who are dictating their authority over the proletariat.
Correct.
So this is what Matthew Quest would say is the best of CLR James. And now one of the things that's interesting, and I know you know this, Mark, because as much I didn't want to think you were calling me out, because you know you're my man.
I know.
Varn is one of my favorites amongst what I call the alabaster leftists. But is that one of the things that you know about this? You know who love CLR James because of that, right? The anarchists. The anarchists love CLR James because that constellation of ideas is directly in line with contemporary anarchist thinking. Many people think that political anarchism means you just go out in your tiki shorts and burn things. Anarchism is based on a political philosophy that basically says that the proletariat should not be managed by the petit bourgeois, and that workers can manage and govern their own affairs, separate from professional managers, and that the nation state will always oppress. And that's why anarchists are always talking about the state, the oppression of the state. If you know anyone who's an anarchist, you'll always hear them say, well, he works for the state. He's a fed for the state. Because they are more worried about the oppression of the nation state than the private sector. And I've always found that interesting, because I always ask, was CLR James an anarchist? And apparently he never was, and he didn't even take any education from anarchists, but he has a strong influence over contemporary anarchists.
You were correct about that, actually. PM Press, which is an anarchist press, is the primary publisher of his books outside of the Black Jacobins. One of the things I would say is he comes to a similar conclusion to Gorter, the council communist from the early 20th century, where he eventually becomes so anti-bureaucratic that he thinks any form of bureaucratic regulation of the workers should be rejected. And that includes unions and parties at all. One of the things that you get in the mid-50s from the Forrest Johnson tendency is in the early Forrest Johnson tendency, they're trying to save the Workers' Party. By the By 50, they just reject the idea entirely, that there should not be a workers' party, that workers should manage themselves. So in this sense, you are absolutely correct about where this goes. I would also say that, like, Trotskyists are super fucking nerdy. We have to deal with that. And that once Trotsky dies, there's a contention over what any of this means. So without Trotsky living to, like, settle the question, people come up with their own theories. One of the things he's rejecting to the Pablo is Pablo says we're going to have deformed worker states for like several hundred years. So James is like, what's the point in that? Why would we support that? But it's interesting that by the time we get to the late 1950s, he's primarily, honestly, a third worldist. He's not really writing that much about the American working class anymore. And he, you know, we can tie this into his biography, but he goes back and forth. And the other thing he starts doing is civilizational politics, which again, if you understand Oswald Spengler, you would understand why that's a big deal for him. He starts seeing civilizations as a primary defining traits, and you can talk about like third world black civilization, etc. It's interesting to look at when we talk about black American politics because, and like I feel like the least qualified person to talk about black American politics, I'll just call that out.
That's why I got you the beer, so you can loosen up and, you know.
I'm as
Just
loose as
really
I'm gonna
lean
get.
into the fact that we call you Sean King and just start saying some crazy N-word shit.
But he primarily derives his view of black politics from Africa and from the Caribbean, not from the United States. And while he very much cares about black American politics, the way he describes them seems to be more based off those assertions. And I'm going to turn this over to somebody else. So.
Well, real quick, Spencer, you are in the OG chair, and OGs get to respond.
I mean, I just wanted to say that the impatience with sectarian leftism is understandable, but we cheer when we talk about socialism, right? And the question, you know, we have to face the fact that in the 20th century, socialism was defeated by socialism, right? That's what talking about Stalinism is about. Right? It's talking about the self-defeat of the left and the self-defeat of the socialist project, and there really hasn't been a project for taking state power and achieving a classless society on a global scale that wasn't led by Marxists and didn't come crashing down in and through Marxism. Right? Marxism is a problem, and that took place. It was done by World War II. Right? After World War II, revolutions mean like developmental projects. We can say, well, the Chinese Revolution was really good at producing Chinese capitalism, or whatever. You know, that we could talk about that. But talking about taking power in the core of capitalism, right? Organizing global capitalism, the achievement of a global dictatorship of the proletariat from the Pentagon, which is what it was built for, right? What it was built for was organizing global socialism. That's what the World Bank, that's what the United Nations, that's what all of these things are for. That's what advanced capitalism is for. And that imagination still haunts us. Nothing took its place, right? Other than just neoliberal capitalism and all the shit that makes us sick to our stomachs to contemplate projected into the future, right? So it is for nerds, and it does make you want to retch, right, facing this history. But you know, let's have some pity on CLR James, because he was a sectarian Marxist to his core.
And an autodidact,
He
right?
was.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Derek Varn. Next in line for the firing squad is my good friend. You want to handle the microphone? You're so rude.
There you go.
Thank you.
Billy Buntin.
Hey.
Billy, can I say, by the way,
What's up, Pascal? Hey, what's up?
can I say, by the way, you look very stylish.
Oh man, thank you.
And
Thank
I didn't want to wear a beanie because I didn't want people to confuse us, even in DC.
you. Yeah, that would be too much.
Right.
It'd be too much.
Right?
Yeah.
You know what? That's fucked up.
He
Whoever
called
the
him
fuck said that is fucked up.
right over there.
All these bald motherfuckers on stage, Spencer's still hanging on, and you have the audacity. That's fucked up. That's some Negro shit. There was a Negro that said that. I know it was. It's fucked up. Is that Marcus said that? You feeling yourself in D.C., huh? You got out of Maine and feeling, goddamn. You know he was the only black dude in Maine for hella long.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Just fucking shit up.
With a full head of hair though.
With a full head of hair, just fucking up
Crushing.
home values and shit.
Crushing it. Not my situation. I love it.
But real talk,
What's up?
what are you here to talk about today, Billy?
What's up, everyone? What I wanted to bring with this, I am not a historian of CLR James. I am getting more and more familiar with him and his work and his writing and his thinking. And what I wanted to talk about was the challenge as I get familiar with his story and his contributions to political thought, the challenge of telling good stories, CLR James, he's profound and prolific, and yet I am just getting familiar with who he is and the ways that we tell stories about history, this tendency to elevate binary figures, MLK and Malcolm X, as though they represent the spectrum of thought at any period, and even the way we talk about history, the civil rights era, as this like sort of 2-decade window of political activity on the race question and all this, and how those modes of telling stories, they fail us. They fail us to understand the texture and the complexity of who CLR James was and all these other historical figures that we've mentioned here, and who we are, that this moment is as relevant and pertinent to, everything that CLR James was going through. And even, the texture of who he was and his Trinidad and European background and history contributed to all that. And so that we are all part of this interesting tapestry. So I just feel excited, first off, that I have the opportunity to start to read about CLR James and get familiar with a new whole bounty of like perspective, but that we can all tell our stories better and with greater complexity. We can all, engage the way that he did, because he was so exciting and has some really cool ideas. Thank you.
A lot of CLR James fans here tonight. Oh shit, Pascal.
Oh shit. Pascal asked for the mic.
Listen, I want to tell you something. Even though I disagree with elements of what he said in Jacobins, I never denied that that's a great polemical work.
Here we go.
That guy was a master writer. He could tell a good anti-slavery story. That's for damn
Fantastic.
sure.
That's what's
and
up.
he captures the brutality of the pre-revolutionary slave economy so eloquently in that book, and explaining the detail of just how sick the French were able to master pitting different black people against each other by literally picking shades against shades, those born in Africa against those born on the island, and just using those divisions to maintain an economy that was to their benefit. And it's just, only the French could create something so horrific. It's really.
I mean, it just seems to me, Billy, that you're invoking James, the artist, the literary man, and that's what he was born to be. He read novels. To me, it's almost like he's a victim of politics. I mean, I stand by what I said, that he was a Marxist to his core, but it was, in a sense, and I'm sure Daniel has thoughts on this too, that the horror of coming of age in the 20s and 30s, and really thinking about his time. The man had already written a novel. He wanted to write about cricket and I think review books and write them for the rest of his life. And instead, he's dragged into these horridly, ultimately sterile or, boring or super nerdy, Marxist debates. And I think he never quite, achieves what he wants to be as a writer. But he is a great writer, one of the few truly great intellects in English language Marxism in the 20th century.
Yeah. Again, still getting my bearings with him, but I agree, and I think part of telling the better story, the best story, includes moving past these fracturings, politically, but also even as I read, again, he understood that race needed to be discussed in the context of class, and that we needed to have a broader conversation that can encompass the fullness of what is, without these separations, which are simply landmines, which allow for the, the political manipulation and all of this. So,
Derek, you want to respond?
Yeah, I guess I do want to respond. One thing I'll say about CLR James is that he's the kind of man who would send monographs about Melville to Congress. So he really believed in the power of art to transcend these differences. Was it effective? I don't know. I mean, obviously, I don't think it changed a damn thing. But it is this belief that culture, left culture, proletarian culture was really important, and that the representation of black culture was really important, was something he really, really did seem to believe in and write about.
yeah.
Right on.
Damn right.
Well, thank you, Billy. Give it up for Billy Buntin. I want to move on because we don't have much time. And one of the things I wanted to do that I'm actually kind of stoked to do, I wanted to take some questions for the audience. Do you guys have some questions? Yes. Okay, I don't know who said that. You have a question.
You have an extra 20 minutes, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That means y'all can get more drinks. Are you guys good and like a little liquored up, a little buzzed? Or are you going to wait to get buzzed at the after party? No? Daniel Tutt, thank you so much for putting this together. Thank you so much to that lovely woman over there for feeding us. All right, all the pleasantries out of the way. You want to talk about something mildly controversial. Let me see this on my bad kids homework page. James's idea of proletarian leadership.
All right. Greetings, everybody. First, I want to say my good friend Vanessa Wills is sick. She was on the program, not able to make it. We sorely miss her. We obviously miss Adolph. Adolph is sick as well, although he was worried because apparently he met James in person and they had strong disagreements. Ethelbert, they taught together at Howard when Adolph was a young man. The thing about CLR James that I recently learned in a great biography by John Williams is that CLR James was raised in a kind of middle-class family. He was supposed to take a test that would have put him into an elite school. Oh, my bad. An elite school, but he failed this test. And it's a blessed history of Marxism that he failed this test. Why is this a blessing? Because I want to push back on what Spencer and Varn said. For CLR James, there was 3 classes, starting in the English Civil War. There was a big bourgeoisie, petty bourgeoisie, P-E-T-T-Y, which I love, like they're petty, and there was the working class, all right? These three classes have almost a static being in some sense. This he articulates in his book on Hegel, which he said was his most important book, called Notes on Dialectics, which Ethelbert interviewed him about. I love that interview, by the way. In this book, CLR James says that the bourgeoisie has no need for knowledge. No need for knowledge. No need for knowledge. The proletarian class is the only class that needs knowledge. Grace Lee Boggs, who's a very interesting Asian woman is the only one who actually passed her exams and got a PhD amongst the Johnson Forest tendency, okay? What was the Johnson Forest tendency? It was autodidactic workers who were outcasts. They were alienated. Now, Karl Marx, the father of socialism, Spencer, had these things called the 1844 manuscripts, philosophic and economic manuscripts. Grace Lee Boggs was the first person to translate them into English. Do you know what they did with these manuscripts, by the way? They didn't bring them to universities. They brought them to Detroit auto workers. This is why I don't believe that CLR James's theory of knowledge is academic knowledge. CLR James's theory of knowledge is for the workers. What did Marx say in 1844 manuscripts? Marx said an implicit support for what we would call a wildcat strike, what we call class struggle unionism. Pascal was mentioning that CLR James was critical of FDR's New Deal. Why would he be critical of FDR's New Deal? Because he's a revolutionary. He's a serious, bona fide revolutionary who is imprisoned on Ellis Island for, I think, over a year, where he pens his little play on Herman Melville. Because you see, CLR James loved pop culture. He wrote plays. He liked to reach the masses. He wanted to find the possibility of a revolutionary spark in an age which had lost all hope for it. He thought that Stalinism was equivalent to Robespierre's element of the French Revolution. He thought it was a petty bourgeois, what we would today call a PMC bastardization of the revolutionary kernel, right? For CLR James, he had what I would consider to be a messianic feeling of the working class. What do I mean by that? By the time of 1981, the Polish Solidarity movement, which was using the tactics of Leninism in the ideological robe of liberalism, CLR James, and I'll be critical here, was supportive of the Polish Solidarity movement because his view of the working class was almost angelic. It was almost spiritual quality. He had so much reverence. He had so much reverence for the possibility of a spontaneous, he felt that bureaucratic Stalinism had infiltrated the United States. And that if workers break from bureaucratic Stalinism, you see, he had the idea that as capitalism gets more progressive, this is one of the flaws, I believe, in the Johnson Forest philosophy. They thought that with welfare state provisions, the working class, if it's capable of realizing a form of agitation outside of bureaucratic management, including of labor unions, this would be sufficient for their activation as a revolutionary agency, completely transcending all bureaucracy, right? Why is that flawed? That's flawed because the era of neoliberalism, which began with Reagan, introduced a new form of immiseration to the working class. And we don't literally have class struggle unionism, which is why the Johnson Forest tendency itself feels as if it was co-opted by a form of neoliberal identity politics in some way. And that's the tragic truth of it. And I think this is a conversation I want to have with all of you and with you, because I think what the James legacy has been to teach the role, what is the role of a Marxist intellectual for James? The role of a Marxist intellectual is to foster a study group setting of a small group of people that could possibly create a spillover. You see, he's reading Hegel, and Hegel has this idea of great leaps, of great random quantitative to qualitative leaps. And he has this idea of where we need to find the universal point at which the jump, at which the leap of revolutionary activity could take off. That's why Pascal, he is accused of being an anarchist. Because he was a spontaneous figure who had a profound fidelity in the possibility of the autonomous working class. So I just want to say it's been an absolute honor to study James as a Marxist. And I do think that if CLR James were alive today, I would be very, very curious to see what he thinks about this model of the study, because that's what the Johnson Forest tendency was. As Varn mentioned, there were only 70 people. There were only 70 people, and their splits, their divisions, their sectarianism was over interpretations of Hegel. Now, like I said before, and I'll stop here, that was not an academic division. These are autodidactic, dropout intellectuals, kind of like us. Does that mean that we should call Marxism some rarefied ivory tower endeavor? Not in my opinion. Not in my opinion. I mean, that's actually why I love TIR. That's why I love Varn Vlog. That's why I love what Billy and everybody is doing, because this is not actually what Marxism is about, and that's not what CLR James would say. CLR James never really got a job. He taught at Federal City College, which was a precursor to the great community college of UDC here. But now, liberal academics treat CLR James as a sacrosanct hagiographic figure who's not to be criticized. And I think that's a great blessing of our event, that we have a critical appraisal of James. And I am sad that Adolf is not here, because we know that he would have a lot of very constructive criticism.
Well,
Where'd Jason go?
I would hope that he didn't repeat what he would say. Can I walk out here and ask you guys questions without this going off? Without the feedback going off? You say that now. Does anyone have any questions? Jesus, you look real fucking serious though with your hand up. Like, you can't look at me like a school shooter like that with your hand up. It's fucked up, man. I'm not from here.
That's my buddy. Don't give him. Be nice. Be nice.
You're gonna do the same thing to me. Looks like we're good. Thank you. We are good. What is your question for the panel? Don't be long-winded.
My bad.
I'll ask it. What is it? Go ahead.
Do you want to, first of all, I just have resting bitch face. I'm sorry about that. I wanted to, this gets a little bit to the spirit of the central question here, but it's something that I think I heard Jason mention about either Pascal's view or somebody else about Black power achieving a cultural victory without a political victory. And I guess in the spirit of our friend Adolf, who's not here currently, is how I'm going to ask my question. I think we've heard Adolf say before, it took him a long time anyway, to figure out what the distinction was between a kind of groundswell culture of the masses that actually has some revolutionary potential and a top-down, elite-produced version of culture that we've assimilated that might posture in revolutionary or left ways. And he says after a long time, he realized he didn't understand the distinction because it was bullshit. In his view, as I'm interpreting it anyway, everything that arises to the level of something we call culture exists within the political economic system that we interact with. And I'm curious whether I'm asking Pascal or opening it for the panel, how, given the just decrepit state of the world today, how anything that came out of Black Power or the Panthers or anything else could be perceived as a cultural victory without there being any political victory.
I told your ass, don't be long-winded.
One of the earliest introductions I had to Adolph Reed came from Bruce Dixon. And I got to Adolph a lot later than a lot of people, because there are a lot of people who had been reading Adolph since the 90s. And I remember sending Adolph an email in the earlier aughts saying, man, if I had started reading your stuff in the 90s, I wouldn't have to deal with these fucked up Negroes, man. He was like, no, I understand that. Because one of the things I appreciated about Adolph, and I started reading his stuff chronologically, is that his 70s writing critiquing Black Power is some of the best criticism of Black Power you will ever get. One of the essays that Spencer mentioned, the Black Particularity Considered, is a phenomenal essay because it literally explains how the cultural industry used all of the Afrocentric fetishism of Black Power to introduce Black particularity, or the concept of blackness for the sake of blackness, as a way to manage Black people particularly and to separate them from the political economy of capitalism by having them watching Soul Train and wearing dashikis, as opposed to talking about what are the working class issues like labor unions and working class issues like getting the good factory jobs that they didn't need to deal with. And also he talked about how that also turned out in developing the Black urban regimes, where every city, it's not just that the Black political class comes out of the management of these urban regimes by white power. Quite to the opposite. Many of Black power radicals supported these urban regimes in the early 70s, even up to the Gary Convention of 1972, because they saw them as a legitimate representative of the voice of the people, and that they could be put pressure on for demands of the people. So don't forget, Bobby Seale, founder of the Black Panther Party, he's running for like elected office in the 70s. So these are the actions of the Black political class. So when you see the founder of the Black Power, just the pinnacle of Black power politics, the Black Panther Party, beckoning to be a member of the Black political class, that tells you that the critique of the Black political class, which I would argue that Adolph Reed starts and really goes viral with a Black Agenda Report, using the term that Glenn Ford coined, Black misleadership class, Adolph was prescient about this in the early 70s. He was a vanguard of critiquing class and its effect on Black politics at a time when no one thought class was relevant to Black politics. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, Pascal Robert. There's one more question, Pascal, and it's from Jeff Kennedy. He wants to know why your ass is sitting like that.
I'm in pain, man.
How are you? Good to meet you. Any more questions? Oh, there's. You have a question. Okay, good.
How you doing? My name is Daryl Cooper. I'm a rising senior at Howard University. I'm a double major right now in economics and political science. So my first introduction to Marxist, Leninist, or socialist, or whatever you want to call it, collectivist political economic theory was reading Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton in high school. So that's my first introduction to it, but I still don't think I fully understand, particularly from an economic point of view. I don't understand it at all. So I was wondering if you could give me a little bit more insight from an economic standpoint, particularly because the main critique of the means of productions being owned or being centralized is economic growth. And I just want a little bit, I don't know, I just want some more context, yeah, a little more explanation, because my point of view or my perspective, well, it's been good, but I think I need a little bit more.
That's fair. Can you help him out, Pascal?
I think I'm going to pass that on to Varn.
You want to make Varn ask the black question?
Well, political economy is based on two things, the mode of production and the relation of production. So what are the relationships undergirding the social economic structure that you're dealing with? Are people who do the work empowered by what they produce? Very simple. If yes, then we're for it. If no, then fuck them. Yeah, I know that is a very simplistic answer. I mean, when we get into the antagonisms of things like culture and race, and the way, for example, let's say the construction of whiteness divides workers, right? One of the things that did in the Southeast is if you look at, say, a union worker in the Southeast in 1945, a black union worker in the Southeast in 1945 makes more money than a white worker who fucking hates black people in the South, all right? Like, so these divisions based on other divisions in the proletariat really do make it hard to organize. The racial divisions in the Southeast were very much a hard line. Like, you hit the Mason-Dixon line, and people started freaking out because you can look at someone like Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was very smart. He was probably the first woke capitalist. He actually drove Manx and Irish workers to identifying as white by using black workers to break their strikes. Right? It is in some ways as simple as that. What are the relations of production and how are those relations being manipulated? Now, when you get into like the ownership of property and the ownership of like income values and stuff like that, you can very easily get mystified because there are relative income levels largely having to do, for example, if you were to look at the black-white wealth gap and people who make under $200,000 a year. That wealth gap is entirely explained by the differences in property values post the 2007 crisis and the way that black families were deprived of wealth capital by the subprime mortgage industry. And if you look at the amount involved, which I think is about $170,000 in wealth, not just income, you can very clearly see that, right? But that's a policy that dealing with the housing crisis would deal with in and of itself. Now, when you deal with something like the general wealth economic gap for people of different races in the United States, and you don't break it down by quartile, then you can pretty much explain it by the primitive accumulation of wealth. So white people have a 150-year lead on black people in the United States. There's no way around that, right? So you can understand that in terms of the accumulation of wealth itself. Which is not to say that all division between white and black people go away if you just handle that. I mean, bigotry is a separate question from all this. One of the things that I have been very critical about, say, critical race theory for doing is collapsing all those things together. So we're no longer talking about bigotry structural racism, systemic racism, which are three separate questions. And you can see this in economics. I worked for a guy who went to Morehouse at said unnamed lizard insurance company. And Mr. Lizard there, I came to him once when I was a young, stupid fucking 22-year-old and asked him what we were going to do about the fact that I could see, and even as early as 2022, before I was even a Marxist, that we disproportionately punished black people for living in the wrong neighborhood, right? And he just said, well, there's nothing we can do about it because it's not a question of bigotry. Now, what the issue really was is wealth accumulation and income accumulation. If you don't have private property, you don't have to fucking deal with that at all. It goes away.
He has a follow-up question, Derek.
Go ahead.
By the way, I appreciate your question about you reading Revolutionary Suicide and you couldn't get the Marxist-Leninism. One of the consequences I found about, particularly in this moment in history, with the rise of some of the politics that happened after 2016, with black folk being divorced from their socialist communist traditions, is the belief that supporting capitalism is something innate to black people. And you see this with the rise of certain phenomenon about how black capitalism is back. Black capitalism was a political idea that comes out of the Nixon administration as a means to neutralize black radical politics, all right? It is the only policy that bipartisanly has been administrated by presidents since then as a solution to the issues of black people. Democrats and Republicans both love black capitalism. That's a fact. So one of the things I want to say is that one of the biggest reasons I became a socialist is that I realized that capitalism has something called the reserve army of labor. The reserve army of labor, when I realized that the neoliberal economist Milton Friedman himself admitted that capitalism requires a reserve army of labor, and this is proven with his theory of the NAIRU. But the NAIRU is basically the natural rate of unemployment. He basically said that capitalism requires a fixed rate of people being unemployed in order for inflation to not overrun the system. So the man who was the primary progenitor or supporter of capitalism is telling you we need people to stay unemployed because our system innately will not support itself because inflation will go under control if we have full employment. So when I heard that Milton Friedman is telling you that this system requires misery to work, I knew I could never be a capitalist. And one of the reasons that this, as a black person, offended me even more is that I know that in order to make the racial mythology of white, quote unquote, supremacy alive in this country, you have to create the ideology in the minds of the majority of whites that surplus reserve army is disproportionately black. Because the white majority is not going to accept being told that the majority of the surplus redundant labor is white, even though it is. But they will be made to believe that the only people suffering from capitalism are black and brown because of their cultural failing, when disproportionately in terms of the numbers of poor people and the numbers on welfare, there are more of them that are white. That is the project of the reserve army of labor in a predominantly white society. It demands that the redundant labor quotient are the colored people. So when I see that black people say things like, I couldn't get the Marxism or Leninism or the socialism, man. Like, how does that work? I was like, oh, because you believe that capitalism works for black people. Now, capitalism might work for you. Don't get it twisted. I'm not blind. I know lots of black people that capitalism works for them as individuals. But overall, for black people in America, no, capitalism does not advantage them at all. It disadvantages them badly.
He wants to follow up with that.
Yeah.
Just a short question. Thank you so much for your responses. I just had a quick follow-up. So in macroeconomics, we have what's called the Gini coefficient, which is basically just the measurement of income inequality for a country, and it's a number from 0 to 1. And I guess my question was more so on the purpose and the solvency, which is like, what is the solution? Oh, my fault. My question is more so on the purpose and like the solvency, which is what is the practicality of, I guess, of the solution that socialism or Marxism purports. Like whether or not for example, what is the purpose to have a nation or have the U.S. have a Gini coefficient of 0.10 or a perfect country where everyone has the same or get as away as, well, I think right now the Gini coefficient for U.S. is at like 0.37, something like that. So what the goal to be to get it down is 0.2 or 0.1, and I guess what's the
So, one of a few things I want to address when you talk about Gini coefficients and GDP. One is GDP is an aggregate number. It's always going to be pulled up by the richest people, period. Even when you adjust it for per capita, if you look at per capita GDP, which I was looking at today, actually, what you see is that small rich countries do better than large rich countries because the number changes based on the amount of inputs. If you look at the, quote, neoliberal development of wealth, which is real, in the whole world, most of it is in one country. Do you know what that country is? China. It's almost entirely in China. Now, I'm not here to argue that China is a socialist country because I actually don't think that, but they have been developing this and spreading that wealth around through cooperative ownership of production. What matters here for the average person, like right now the GDP in the United States is doing rather well. And most of you, how many of you feel richer than you did 10 years ago? Just 2 of you, 3 of you, 4. I admire your ability to admit that. I do too, actually. But the relative wealth there is totally an average number. All right. So one of the things you have to deal with is what is driving that average up? Is it one small portion of the entire population pulling that entire GDP up or not? And how much is that mitigated by things like inflation, et cetera? And this is something you have to deal with when you deal with this in economics. So I understand the criticism as far as like economics goes. We could be all equal and dirt fucking poor, right? No one wants that. Like, I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to be dirt poor. And we could have total. You can have a low Gini coefficient if you're all just completely immiserated. But one of the reasons that we talk about this is both. I mean, there's 2 things you have to deal with. In Marxist economics, you have to deal with both the development of modes of production and also the relations of production, who's in charge of how that is distributed. The aggregate necessarily hides that, like 100%. So whenever you deal with an aggregate, the richest portion of the population is going to pull that entire number up. Which is why you can believe things like trickle-down economics when you're just dealing in aggregate distributions. And it's kind of a math problem. Now, when it comes to Gini coefficient, which is a little bit more complicated because that measures wealth inequity. Now, I've already talked about how I kind of think that's misleading because wealth is not always the best way to judge this. But even just looking at that, we can see that economies that aim to be capitalistic have a higher Gini coefficient. However, if you look at very suppressed economies, like let's say, I'm going to pick Guatemala, if you want to pronounce it correctly, which I didn't do. The Gini coefficient is very high, right? Because you have super wealthy people in Guatemala City and you have dirt poor people in the countryside. One of the things about Xi Jinping, again, and I'm not saying this as a fan of him, I'm not, but one of the things you can look at is with relative investment into the countryside, which the Communist Party around 2015, 16, 17 in China really did, which was abandoned by Deng in the 1980s, was to reinvest infrastructure into the countryside of China. And it lowered their Gini coefficient dramatically. So the Gini coefficient in 2010 was much higher than the US, and now it is significantly lower. Now, again, there's other things we can look at. Do workers really have power in China? I don't know. I mean, probably not. But these are things that these stats can hide from you when you're breaking them down. One of the things I mentioned earlier is when we're trying to figure out rates of profit, no one agrees on how you measure rates of profit. All right? Do you just look at the GDP? Do you look at the marginal returns on individual items? So there's a lot of shenanigans going on with the math, but you need to do country comparative studies to really make that decision. And I will tell you, bourgeois economists are not particularly great at doing that. And a lot of times I have to look at Bureau of Labor Statistics studies and try to figure it out myself by changing the definitions of the inputs. So it's very hard to get past that, and I consider it a form of mystification. I'm gonna let someone else talk.
Thank everybody. I wanted to ask my question, but I wanted to just clarify in some of the things that I heard today, that some of the things I really agree with, and other things I'm just like, that's some bullshit. When you asked Dr. Tutt, yes, when you stated that CL James didn't pass a test, I guess you was talking about some kind of standardized test that was given out through in Jamaica at that time, where they were trying to say that, Trinidad and Jamaica.
Prevented him from going to the most elite schools.
Right, so, right. So those tests were trying to prove biological inferiority of people in the Caribbean at that particular time that had flowed out of the United States. And I think by Davenport, who Pascal, I think you told me, did his doctoral dissertation on the Haitian Revolution. I think you told me. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So when we start asking the question around economics, and we got to get back to the fundamental question of economics, whether it's Marxism, whether it's neoliberal capitalism. Neoliberal capitalism did not start with Reagan. It has a long history in the inferiority, again, of black folks in the beginning of the 20th century and the late 19th century around Galton and Darwinism. So,
Baltimore.
my question to you is, right about that issue of the intellectualism, who was trying to prove, because I know Charles Davenport went down to the Caribbean. Those who don't know, Charles Davenport was somebody with the eugenics movement who went down to the Caribbean to try again to reaffirm the idea of white racial superiority and white supremacy by creating these tests that were failing in America to actually do that. And I think it was only in Washington, D.C. in the 1950s when they came up with something called Negro lag. And then in the 60s, they came up with what they call achievement gap, which is some bullshit. And it talked about, again, the inferiority of blacks. They were always trying to prove the inferiority of blacks. So explain again how he couldn't pass that particular test.
It simply allowed James to become an autodidact. And that's why I believe it's a blessing for Marxism, because he became a mentor to all of the leading bourgeois, in some cases petty bourgeois African revolutionaries in London at his flat, where they would come and listen to him talk about the books he was reading in the off time at the jobs he was working, because he wasn't in elite school. Because in elite school, you got to read certain things that are not based in revolutionary Marxism. CLR James said there's 3 books that any Marxist needs to know. Spengler's Decline of the West, Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and Karl Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. If you know those books, you are an intellectual, no pedigree, no degree necessary. So his idea of knowledge was outside of the academy, is the point I'm trying to make. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So I don't know if others agree with my view. I'm influenced by his biography, and I think that it's inspiring. I don't think that James cared because he was also an artist. He didn't really want to go down that path that he was being groomed for. He was writing plays, he was bohemian. The Trotskyists never trusted him because they always said he was too bohemian.
So my question to you is, did he fight a battle in in Trinidad before he left and went to London around those same intellectual ideas?
You mean in the First World War? No, is that what you're asking?
No.
Before he
left for London, before he moved to London, did he fight a battle? Was there a battle around the Beacon and Dr. Harlan with C.L. James around the idea of racial inferiority and intellectualism?
Right. I don't know, what would you say, Pascal? Spencer, you want to jump in on this?
About, test taking, what happens is, everybody knows James is the most brilliant young man in Trinidad. That's really clear. His father was his teacher. He won a scholarship to the best school in the island. And in his high school years, he decided he didn't care about the curriculum that they were teaching him. And he started stepping out of the class and basically devised his own curriculum. And it was expected that he would win the scholarship from Trinidad to go to Oxford. And he didn't, because he didn't care. He stayed in Trinidad for a while, and he did write about the question of Trinidadian independence. It should be understood that the former slave population in Trinidad was not at the bottom of the social hierarchy in Trinidad, right? That's a mistake, right? The coolies who were brought from India, who as indentured laborers were at the bottom of the social hierarchy in Trinidad. And the black population was already in the civil service. They were teachers, they were professionals. CLR James's father was a teacher, right? So he's from a very specific island in the Caribbean that has its own history.
Did they push back against intellectualism? Did his father got him a tutor? Did they push back about the intellectualism and the scientific racism that was flowing in Trinidad, Jamaica at that particular time. Even
I would say that CLR James was deeply keyed into the radical, even revolutionary, egalitarian traditions of Europe going back into the 18th century. CLR James was, as Derek has already mentioned, he was very European. He knew Greek, he knew Latin, he knew English, and he knew French. He read French as well as he read English. He wouldn't have spent 1 minute worrying about some pseudoscientific theory of inferiority. He was keyed into the thought going all the way back to the 18th century that human beings are equal and that the differences that we see among them in different societies are a function of history, right? That argument's already there in the Enlightenment, and he knows that those ideas were explosively revolutionary and that they were part of the revolutions of slave revolts in the 18th century, right? People read radical French Enlightenment texts. Black people read radical French Enlightenment texts in the Caribbean, and they drew revolutionary conclusions from those texts, right? So I think that he wouldn't have had the time of day. He would have known, in other words, that that's a bunch of right-wing claptrap. And he wouldn't have bothered with that any more than I think any young black man should.
Yeah, I just want to say 3 things before people leave here about CLR James. One, because it has not been mentioned. If you want to get a good understanding of CLR James, read his novel, Minty Alley. Yeah, that says a lot about his position in the issues of class. The second thing is, which people don't do, read his letters, especially to Constance Webb. That's very important. Then in terms of the impact on African Americans, in terms of movement, look at the fact that the History of Pan-African Revolt, CLR James' book, was published by German Spirit Press because of the people coming out of SNCC, people like Charlie Cobb especially. Those are 3 things that show you a different sense in terms of, one, how you can get a good understanding of CLR James, and also how CLR James affected young people. He affected the people of SNCC, the Charlie Cobb, the Cortland Cox right here in Washington, D.C. And then you can look at some of his students at Federal City College. One of the best students, I think, is Alden Nielsen, okay, who studied CLR James at Federal City College. And his name is not mentioned. So I just do a few things that did. But one of the things, many times people are talking about politics, and this is a separation of politics and culture. They don't read the novels. Okay, read Minty Alley, which had an impact on West Indian literature. Okay, and that's very important. Look at CLR James in terms of grief and loss after Walter Rodney's assassinated. Okay, and then you'll see, so he'll say, Walter Rodney should not have been in the place where he was. He should not have been actually, been trying to organize people to the point that he placed himself at risk. And that was very interesting to hear his announcement. Why didn't CLR James go to the 6th Pan-African Congress? What was his reason for that? There's a lot of things that are happening here that I think a whole nother generation of scholars have to fill in the facts. But it's a holistic approach to your research, okay? I think the young brother from Howard was very interesting in terms of, economics. Okay, you want to talk about economics? Look at Martin Luther King's speech. The March on Washington, look at the first part of that speech, which is an indictment of capitalism, okay? But what do? We teach the second part of the speech, I have a dream, because it's nice to put kids to bed with that. But what happens is that it's a critique. Now, black capitalism, forget about Richard Nixon for a minute. You want to talk about black capitalism? Is anybody talking about Earl Graves and Black Enterprise magazine? And then who helped Earl Graves get a magazine? Robert Kennedy. See, Bedford Stuyvesant coming out. That's where Black Enterprise magazine begins. Okay, you want to talk about capitalism? Forget about Martin Luther King for a minute. Talk about Whitney Young. Talk about the Urban League. I'll end on that.
We're gonna have to move on, because fucking around with Jeff. You have a question?
I do. Yeah, so this is going to be kind of, I guess, broad. But my question to the whole panel is, how do you consider what CLR James would say about the state of the left today with all these threads of not only class, the relationship between class and racism, the relationship between culture and nationalism, and the self-activity of the working class, the strength of the working class as an independent force, and also internationalism. So just for a brief example, earlier today there was a very huge, significant rally in support of against the genocide in Palestine. There's also, as mentioned earlier by the poet whose name I can't remember, but who mentioned earlier how Haiti is currently facing a civil war between military forces labeled as gangs, and there's a UN intervention led by Haiti on behalf of the US. So my question is, what would CLR James say about these developments, the way that the left may talk about some of these developments but not others, and the overall state of the left today?
Thank you very much. Who wants to take that? Spencer, you want to take that?
Yeah, let me say one thing, and I'll kind of fold my response to Daniel's comments and also to the gentleman who just spoke about James in the 60s and 70s. And I think what I want to say is that we should respect the fact that CLR James would be 123 today, right? CLR James is a man the likes of which almost nobody in this room has ever met, right? He was 16 years old in 1917. It was a real event in his life, right? He knew people. He knew people who took part in the Bolshevik Revolution. He knew people who took part in an attempt to create socialism in the heart of capitalism. Those were his comrades. He comes along a little later. He comes to politics later in his 20s. But it's a very different experience than the post-World War II world. It's a very different experience than the post-World War II world. Most of us in this room have never met anybody who actually felt in their bones that capitalism was coming to an end in their lifetime. CLR James felt that in his bones at one time in his life, and he knew people, older people, who did. And so we shouldn't forget that about him, right? If we take that CLR James, right, I would say he's not just interested in reading circles, right? He is interested in what happened to mass political parties for socialism in the United States and in Germany and in Britain and in France. And today, of course, that geography would be different, right? But that would be what he would be asking, right? And the Gaza situation, or all of the social degradation that we see in terms of declining longevity rates, nihilism, et cetera, he would see these as morbid symptoms of capitalism. He would see them as morbid symptoms of the collapse of freedom in history. That's what he would say, right? It's hard to hear that, right? Because when he's talking about the anti-colonial movements after the war, et cetera, he's talking about addressing a crisis. He's not talking about a new revolution and the old revolutionary project is just off the table and now we're down with third world revolution or something like that. As Derek rightly said, he thought that this would be a way potentially of rebooting the struggle for socialism in the world. Right? He wasn't interested in just socialism in Africa. He wasn't just talking to Nkrumah and Kenyatta and whomever. Like Frantz Fanon and others, he was interested in how decolonization struggles were symptoms of crisis. They were symptoms of the crisis that was the failure of freedom in world history. right? That's what he was interested in. And he thought, well, maybe those struggles can bring something back into America or bring something back into Europe, right? That's how those thinkers were thinking. They weren't leaving that old project behind. It was like an amputated limb for CLR James.
Thank you very much. We have another question. I know you guys want to filibuster. Be careful with the question you ask, because these are some talkative MFs on stage.
Hello. My comrade and I here got in kind of late, so forgive me if any of this has already been addressed. But I was interested in so I've been engaged in a somewhat intensive study of CLR James recently, and I was interested in, there seems to be a real kind of inconsistency between his belief in the inherent revolutionary potential of the working class, and then like you see in the Forrest Johnson tendency, right, this belief that the working class is inherently revolutionary. We just have to identify these formations that will kind of just lead to revolution. That kind of anarchistic sort of tendencies you're talking about, the eschewing bureaucracy, all of that. He definitely says that, that's the ideology he espouses. But at the same time, he doesn't, if you read a lot of his work, he really seems to fall, a lot into, great manism, right? If you read, Black Jacobins, is he's obsessed with Toussaint. He gushes over Toussaint. Oh, Toussaint, I love Toussaint so much, right? And his book on world revolution, he just gushes over Lenin. I've also read Mariners and Renegades and Castaways. It's literary criticism, right? And that's quite different, but he really gushes over, Melville, right? It's and a lot of his work is just dedicated to just gushing over leadership type figures, and for someone who hates bureaucracy, he seems to really love leaders and kind of professionals, intellectuals, and that kind of thing. So yeah,
I can briefly say something.
Thank you very much.
The motto of every cook can govern from the Leninist tradition is something that CLR will retain, and it's a form of radical egalitarianism that CLR thought dialectically. He never thought it as a fetishization of a great man, liberal individualist theory of history. So it's never a fetishization of Lenin as a man. It's a acknowledgement of Lenin as a strategist for the achievement of socialist freedom. That's the basis of his love for Lenin, and why, even in his break with Dunavskaya and Boggs and so on, he remains a Marxist over a Hegelian, precisely because he still thinks that the Leninist tradition is viable, right? But I think we need to be careful how we read that. It's not a celebration of Lenin as a man, it's a celebration of Lenin as a figure of history, as a figure of Marxist history whose thought needs to be revised, but it's at the level of his thought that needs to be interrogated, right? So that's what I would say. And it's always for James about assessing where the site of what he calls the universal can spark a revolutionary sequence, right? You have to assess things in that Hegelian dialectical modality, never from the standpoint of, which is why I feel like Black Jacobins and Pascal's critique of it is a good critique, because it is a bit retrograde for James to celebrate Toussaint, which is something he kind of doesn't do in his later work, in my opinion. But I'll turn it over to Derek.
I want to pick up on that, because James sees figures of history as manifestations of class position. And that is a very strange thing for us to deal with today. He sees Lenin as a manifestation against a battle against petit bourgeois ideology, and that is why he valorizes him so much. He sees Melville as both representing the spirit of the good spirit of bourgeois ideology and also the problems with it, which is why he valorizes him so much. He does not really give a shit about these people as individuals. He doesn't talk about, Walt Whitman also. He doesn't talk about their ideology as products of their brain. He sees them as manifestations of particular instances in time. Now, as Daniel didn't get to talk about, this gets weird later on. It really does. If you read Notes on the Dialectic, like he talks about all kinds of strange things, whole civilizations as manifestations of class ideology, but that's how he thought. Now, for us today, that seems bizarre because a lot of us view individuals as atomized individuals, not products of their relations in the mode of production and their point in history. We view ourselves as special, unique snowflakes, and James doesn't give a shit about that at all. He does believe in individual freedom, but he doesn't see that as contradicting these other intrapersonal things. He thinks that's a misreading of history in a decadent period of bourgeois development. But I do think it leads to stuff like Pascal talks about, actually, with valorizing particular people as manifestations of ideology, and he does this with Toussaint Louverture in a kind of bizarre way. The book that I would read about this is actually American Civilization, which is a wild book, and Notes on the Dialectic, which are not books that are read commonly by James. All right.
Thank you very much. Do we have, how are we on time, Daniel?
We're about to over.
We're over right now? Can we ask one more question? You want to, we're trying to leave to go to the other bar. It's fucked up.
For the VIP, we got news, $5 beers, $7 wine, $6 wine, $7 mixed drinks.
Honorary member of the team.
Only one block down, Sud House.
Thank you very much. Who's coming to the VIP after party?
If you want to talk.
At the VIP after party, I will be instigating a fight between Jeff Kennedy and Daniel Tutt. I just want you to know that. So get ready for the fisticuffs. Who has a question? Who has a question since we got all this goddamn time? Anybody? All right. Hold on. Get back here. Excuse me. Excuse me. Pardon me. Excuse me. There you go.
How y'all doing? My question's not really related to anything that we talked about tonight. Listen to the show often. First time I heard about Project 2025, and I've been telling everybody that I know that reads, hey, you guys should check this out. They all came back to me and they said, this is kind of terrifying, but also what is the response from any opposition to that, and what would that look like?
Did you guys hear him?
I couldn't hear it.
I think he's Project 2025.
Yes, Project 2025. Heard about it on the show.
We studied that. We know about that.
Yeah.
I read it,
That's a great question.
passed it out to a bunch of people I know that actually read stuff. They all read it, they came back, they said this is kind of terrifying. And what is the response to this, and what would the opposition to this look like?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You guys got to stop playing.
Yeah, I can talk about it, but go ahead.
Yeah, some of the details of Project 2025 are horrifying. When you say the response to it, I think it's the first thing I think to notice is that there is no opposition party, Democrat response. As far as I see, the two parties are, obviously there's one that's a bit more, straightforward there, and there is no, we can't even muster a decent response to the Republic, to genocide, from the Liberal Party. And so Project 2025 and the lack of response, the lack of public knowledge, the lack of public debate, the lack of discussion in the media, to me harkens back to the CLR James question about, what is it? What's the phrase? Every cook can govern. The need for each of us to take up the mantle of our own education and our own empowerment, and to engage. Just politically, our political system doesn't give us a viable political alternative to these horrifying things that are just on the horizon. That's what I have.
Derek Varn.
So I've read the entire fucking document, which is way too goddamn long to talk about, but there's a couple of things in it. One, if they mean it, if the Heritage Foundation means it, Trump won't be long for this world. By that I mean they go after things like the monetary standard of the US when returning it to a gold standard, which I can almost promise you the military would not tolerate. That they published it 2 years before he actually has a chance of coming to office indicates that they don't particularly think that it's that much of a threat to the actual organization of the United States if they did what's in it, and I admit, it's 900 pages, peeps, so I get that you probably don't want to read that. All these documents are designed so you don't read them. But there are all kinds of things in it. There's preferential treatment for Christian nationalism. There is a return to the gold standard. There is replacing all the administrative state, which I do think, by the way, as people who believe in democracy, any liberal who's defending the democratic state right now does not the administrative state right now does not actually really believe in that democracy, because that's the least democratic part of the government. But nonetheless, they are aiming to completely gut that. My suspicion is they're not that serious about it. I remember what Trump said in 2015 about, for example, the relationship to Saudi Arabia, which he reversed in 2017. For those of us who are leftists in any serious sense, I'm gonna challenge a couple things that are generally concerned. If you think voting for Biden is gonna stop this, I want you to look at the policies that have been normalized under the Biden administration. I mean, literally yesterday, Biden went farther than Trump did on amnesty.
Yes.
All right? If you think that they are actually opposing these changes in the American regime, you have to square that with the fact that they have done nothing about most of them. And they have actually normalized them and gotten the administrative parts of the state that were opposed to them on board with their implementation under the Democratic administration. And I know a lot of people are uncomfortable about that, but that's a fact. So when you look at that, my response is, if you're really scared of 2025, why aren't you asking Democrats not to suck so bad that they're going to lose this next election? Because it is terrifying. But there is nobody who is really going to oppose a lot of this stuff in the United States government, including people like, and I should be careful because we have DSA people supporting us today, but including DSA electeds who didn't do shit about it. So these are just things we have to look at. If we're actually scared about this, we have to ask more of our bullshit liberal politicians, because they have ceded that to these people.
Can't take Derek Varn anywhere. You want to add to that, Spencer?
I mean, I would just say, if they're talking about going to the gold standard, these people are cranks, or it's a plant, it's a psyop, it's total bullshit. They're cranks, exactly. These are unserious people. It's not just the military, it's the whole of American capitalism wouldn't go along with that. These people are absolute, it's a joke, right? The real point is they're trying to scare you into being a Democrat until you die, right? There's no end to capitalist politics. That's the real point. Right? Forget about fearing the Republicans or whatever. These people, they don't even run a serious American city, right? Seriously, right? The Republicans are not the party of capitalism in the world. The Democratic Party is the core of the entire capitalist world politically. I mean, let's be serious, right? This is the party of imperialism and austerity. And they can't run Washington or New York City or Chicago or any place, right? Occasionally they'll be president, but they're not going to go instituting the Heritage Foundation's wish list. It's a joke. I mean, really, it's a joke. Right? What we need to think about is the assault on our liberties and our political freedoms that is undertaken by this government, with the total authorization of the Democratic Party, but it will go on after they're not in office. It will be going on after they come back, right? That's the real issue, right? We need, of course, to invoke the spirit of James. You think James ever voted for the Democrats? Right? His whole argument in the Negro question writings that I was addressing is that these people, the Communist Party, have dragged us into a popular front with FDR. And 80% of American blacks dropped out of the Communist Party because they don't want to be in the party of Jim Crow. Right? Of course. And you know, this is what communism means in America, right? He was interested in class-independent politics. And you can mock Trotskyism all day long, but it is holding on to that. Its critique of the Popular Front is dead on, right? It's dead on. Yeah.
We do not have Adolph Reed here, and Adolph Reed just wrote an op-ed for The Nation, Why I'm Choosing to Vote for the Enemy, where he does capitulate. And I do wish he was here for this, and I want to actually kick it to Pascal, because last night at my home, in my basement, Pascal and I talked about this. What would you say to Adolph if he was here on this question of voting for the Democrats?
See how Daniel be trying to start shit? That's some Daniel Tutt ass starting shit question. That's fucked up. This shit's on camera, Daniel. I mean, we didn't even shut the camera off before you asked a question like that. That might be an at your house question. You letting all these people into the at your house questions. It's fucked up.
I mean, I don't think. I think it's a very simple reality. I think it comes down to the fact that Adolph Reed has Communist International Popular Front tactics when it comes to left politics. In that, when a reactionary, right-wing, crypto-fascist element is in your face, you corral with the liberals to defeat that. As much as I agree with Spencer's argument that the Democrats can, and I would frame it this way, the Democrats get away with crap that Republicans would never get away with.
Facts.
Because they're Democrats.
Facts. Yeah.
All right? That's the way I would frame it, is that they're liberal. The danger of liberals is that liberals can echo conservative political sentiment without any consequence under the name of pragmatism.
I do want to send, we haven't mentioned this at all, but I want to send a big ass thank you. If you watch This Is Revolution, we mention this young man a lot. And I want to send, can everybody give a big round of applause for Quinn? The Quintern, as we call him. He's still an intern. I don't know what the fuck that means at this organization because we don't have any money. But Quinn hit me up, was it 2 years ago now? Yeah, 2 years ago, and said, hey, I want to be an intern for TIR. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And he goes, I want to help you with the stuff that you do. And I was like, I don't trust anybody. I said, I have to meet you in person because I can't give you the passwords to shit because I have one password for everything. And I can't do that. And I met him in New York. You waited 4 months. And we've been friends. And you're part of the TIR private chat where we say ungodly things that shall never be repeated. Derek is a part of that chat. This is a horrible chat. We can't let Daniel Tutt have any access. That motherfucker will tell you people what we say. Snitchy ass Daniel. Does anybody else have a question? Now you guys are quiet? Okay. No, you already asked one.
I got some.
Wait, hold on. We got guys in the front. We got guys in front.
Hey, I don't know how much this has to do with CLR James, but I think that a lot of what you guys have been talking about made me think about practically like what can members of the Reserve Army of Labor actually do that makes a difference. Well, short of shooting people. I don't own a gun. I'm sorry. I'm not from Georgia. You know what I mean, Varn? Not all of us are like that. But you know, I mean, practically, like, you know, it's cool to go out and protest or whatever, but that doesn't really seem like it changes much, at least for the short time I've been alive. I've just turned 25 today, and I just feel that, like, oh. Thank you. No, but seriously, I just think that I feel like I was born into a world where we were already defeated, and I just don't know what to do about that. And I think a lot of Oh, well, no, that's easy to say, but I don't have a job. You know what I mean? How am I supposed to unionize with no job? So, I don't know. Yeah, here you go.
You got it, Varn? They're passing the mic, Varn.
One thing you guys need to do is organize regardless of the fact if you have a job or not. I'm a member of a union. I'm a union rep. But if you expect unions you're totally fucked. They are necessary. I'm not here to shit on the unions. If you can join a union, you better fucking join it. But there's this kind of liberal myth that we have that the people turned on the unions in the 70s just because of Reagan and the conservative movement. And that's just not true, all right? They were really involved in the management of labor, and part of what you do if you want to get a contract is to suppress labor militancy. So, this is something you have to realize. If you are a part of the Reserve Army of Labor, or if you are 80% of Americans in a field that does not have a union that represents them, let's be completely frank here. You need to look at how you start doing what the unions did before the Wagner Act, all right? Which means you need to get out there in your community and start organizing people to support union actions, and you have a lot more freedom than the unions do because you are not limited by Taft-Hartley law prohibitions. This is what you should be doing. If you want to get involved in a 10-inch union, you want to get involved with the DSA, you can do that, but you need to be involved in something, all right? Now, the other thing you need to be doing is educating yourself to the best of your ability. This idea that we have right now, that somehow education is some bourgeois construct, don't fucking believe it. The people selling you that are treating you like you're a goddamn idiot. All right, you are not. I come from dirt. I don't even have a working class background. I have a lumpen background. So you can use that to your advantage, and it's getting harder. And I want to point something out. A lot of liberal reforms are making it harder, and they're being sold under the guise of fairness. All right, we realize that most of the testing regimes are eugenic. They are. By the way, the testing regimes, they're absolutely eugenic. They are. But you know what's even more so? Teacher assigned grades. And I say this as a teacher. I work as a teacher in my day job. I can tie grade point percentage off of your skin tone, not just your race, how dark you are. It is predictive. So if you think getting out of the testing regime is going to help you, this entire system is still set up in a particular way to punish certain groups of people. And why do they want to punish those certain groups of people? All right, to really pull this out is because it divides people against people who share similar interests to them. All right? So as much as you can do, if you are a white person, be there and supporting any issue that makes your life and say any marginalized community's life. I don't even like that fucking language, but I'm just going to talk it because that's what you understand. Any marginalized community's life, and it can tie your interests together. You get out there and you get your ass doing that. All right? That's your goddamn job. Because it's also going to benefit you. All right, whatever happens to the black community will happen to the poor white community eventually. You can see this in incarceration rates, you can see it with the funding of schools. They experiment basically on how they're gonna fuck all of us over, off of how they're gonna fuck obvious groups who have differences over. So whenever people try to break up that solidarity, you resist it. That's what you can do in the Reserve Army of Labor. I realize that if, you always get told join a union or start a union. That's hard, all right? If people just pretend that it's not hard, they're lying to you, all right? The service sector, which, by the way, maybe I should start a riot here tonight. I don't know. But the service sector is what 1.5% unionized. All right, it's the fastest growing part of the American labor pool. And these kinds of issues are hard to organize because normal organizational traits are based on sites with large working populations, all right? And people can sell you a lot of bullshit on this. They will tell you that the workers' movement is growing right now. Objectively, it's not, all right? It's not. There's a lot of labor militancy out there. A lot of people are really angry, but how many of you can join the UAW? All right. All right, so this is what you need to do. You actually asked a question that I'm really passionate about, so I'm glad you did.
Thank you very much, Derek Varn. There's no server here to give him another beer because we have to calm him down before we go to the next venue. It's also someone else's birthday today. For a lot of Saturdays, we did a show on TIR where there was another black guy. That black guy's here. His name is Marcus from the Left Flank Vets. Can you say happy birthday to Marcus? I'm not letting you ask a question, nigga. No. I can't, not at all. No, you dreadlock son of a bitch. Yeah, nah. And I also want to give a fact, if you watch the show, and there's a sports show we do, I think CLR James would appreciate that. He might even be a viewer of it. My co-host drove all the way from North Carolina. Give it up for Mac. I also, as we're getting ready to wrap up, I do want to say this. Jordan has been so wonderful. Thank you, busboys and poets, for letting me live my Montel Williams dream of walking around with a microphone and asking questions. I get really excited to do that. I'm not even playing. I hate getting questions on a stream because I want to walk up to you. I want to see your face as you ask it, right? I want to hear the passion in your voice. I want to get looked at like school shooter guy with serious fucking eyes. I want all that shit to happen when I'm walking around with the goddamn microphone asking you guys if you have a question. Because if I don't do this, I'm gonna send a comment and I'm all kinds of pieces of shit and I don't know this, that, and the third. And then, because I read them all, because I have issues with my self-esteem. And that's like cutting yourself in the modern era, is reading the comments. And every day, I'm in the mirror crying a little bit. Marcus knows, because if you on the chat, then you know that I'd screenshot the question or the comment that you sons of bitches send, and I said, would you believe what Ass Nugget 45 said about what Derek Varn said? So if Ass Nugget 45, if you're out there, just know, it hurts. Cuts deep. That being said, does anybody have any more questions? You can ask us anything at this point. These people behind me get massive erections to talk. You want to ask a question?
Thanks, everyone. It's kind of long-winded, but I didn't write a poem. I'll keep it as short as possible. So one of the main problems that James is trying to deal with in his Trotskyist and post-Trotskyist writings is the question of the revolutionary subject in the wake of, as Spencer said, the world historic defeat of socialism. Varn, you raised James on state capitalism, and this was, as you put it, a response to the seeming passivity and subordination to bureaucratic states, both in the Soviet Union and in the West of the working class. James's third worldism was similarly a response to the same problem in the midst of third world nationalist or national liberation struggles around the world. But James, the good Trotskyist, right, which is a different period, would have agreed that the revolutionary subject is the International Socialist Party, the political organization of the international working class. So there seems to be, as history moves, an inconsistency over this problem of the revolutionary subject within James's work itself. Spencer, you put it as it's a response. It's not like a separate question. Nonetheless, the historical moment put the question differently to James. So this makes me, think, what James is still relevant to leftists today. What does it mean to say that the 1960s New Left was able to take up James's third worldism, but had to leave his Marxism behind? Who is this revolutionary subject of history that doesn't seem to be constituting itself? Is it the role of leftists to constitute the working class, right, for itself? Does James really task us in any way other than, as you put it, right, his ability to tell a narrative? Does he task us politically in any way, or has history left him behind?
Thank you very much for that very thought out series of questions. No, seriously, clap it up for this young man. Well, here, I'll you know what? I'll throw the mics because there's so much to go. Here, Tutt.
I tried to touch on some of this in my remarks. One of the interesting things about James, we had the university uprisings for Gaza, which I 100% supported, and some Marxists had a premonition that it was a recurrence of the New Left notion that the students would become the substitute revolutionary subject. And if you read James's work, he never flirted with that idea, ever. Never. It would remain the Leninist tradition, it would remain the centrality of the working class, and I think that would be his #1 contribution, given that tonight's keynote, who's not here, has worked tirelessly to remind Marxist theorists of the centrality of the working class. James, I think, even despite Adolf's profound critiques with him, would insist on solidarity on that point, #1. The Johnson-Forrest tendency was kind of anti-vanguard in a certain way, right? So that kind of goes back to the question before about how James saw leadership in a radically horizontal way, which is why anarchists can get down with him in a certain way, and why he collapses and almost makes anarchism irrelevant and makes it copacetic to communist politics. And that's something great about James, in my view, although Spencer Leonard may disagree, and we have very few time, and I'll give other comrades a chance. Maybe we can each say a closing remark, Jason?
I think that CLR James, though, as again, in context, based on my critiques of Black Jacobins, I think he transcends Black Jacobins. That book was written in 1938. That's early in his career. He had published other works around that time. But in terms of his left ideological political trajectory, it surpasses so far beyond Black Jacobins. And I do not want anyone to take away from my critique that I am diminishing the importance of CLR James. CLR James is a profoundly important left intellectual thinker only because, if only because, is because he was so knowledgeable and so dedicated to revolution from below and took it very seriously. And even though, yes, it has been applied, it has been usurped by anarchists and, creates questionable debates about nation-state theory, the premises of those statements about nation-state theory really can't be denied. In other words, to critique the nation-state, I think has to be a fundamental left project if we're serious about what we're trying to do. I think that the only response is to admit we need nation-states, but realize that once we are on that project, basically becoming a corrupted worker state is not far down the project. So he challenges the concept of nationalism, challenges political bureaucracy. I think that that's too important to relegate this man to the dustbin of history, and too important to simply say, what does he think about Black Lives Matter or Gaza or anything else? Because as Spencer Leonard has said, his experiential transcendence almost goes beyond these little picayune matters of today, because he saw so much before some of us even could conceptualize what leftism even means.
I said at the beginning, that maybe the one thing I disagreed with Pascal about was that CLR James was a historian. And I thought CLR James was a historian. I don't actually mean that as particularly directed at Pascal, but rather to think about James as a student of Hegel, a student of Marx, a student of Lenin, himself wanted to be a revolutionary, that he conveys, to an extent embodies, channels a vast human struggle for freedom. Right? He is a student of freedom. That is what he is. That's what it means to say he's like engaging with Hegel and like writing crazy notebooks about Hegel, right? He understands, the slave revolting on Saint-Domingue. He understands the peasants responding to simple slogans like land, peace, and bread. He even sees it when it's directionless, leaderless, even self-undermining in the 20th century, right? He still sees that as this recurring revolutionary project of freedom, even when the wheels are coming off and it may even be driving a process of regression, right? So what I would say is, the historian who is, in a sense, tasked by the past, right? Right? It's not about the future, right? It's about how are we only here given all the sacrifice that has been made for our freedom, right? In the face of it all, we can't just be happy. We have to advance it, right? For the sake of our slave forefathers, right? That's what I would say about CLR James.
To answer the question a little bit specifically, the reason why CLR James abandons the Socialist Party as the subject of the revolution is that he thinks the Socialist Party has changed its class positionality and has moved into representing the petty bourgeoisie. That's what he says in the 1948 text. So, I think he goes too far in rejecting the idea of organization tot court, all right? We cannot do that. You have to get organized. You have to get organized in a variety of ways. But what matters is who can reproduce both materially and socially the world that we have right now, and are those people entitled to its benefits or not? All right? And as long as the, quote, working class or the proletariat is entitled, is shut out of that, but they can reproduce it, then they are the political subject. If that is not the case, then I don't know, we're all fucked. But nonetheless, that's the idea. No singular other group can reproduce the majority of society. That is why. It is not because the working class are victims. Marxists, I mean, I know this is hard for you to hear, but Marxists don't really give a shit about who's the victim. It's who can end the victimization as such. It is not about justice. It's about ending something that is a constraint on freedom. All right? And that is the subject you need to back.
Yes. So I think I'm gonna wrap. I think I'm last. So I think the thing that excites me most about my reading of James has to do with the very interesting sort of space that he seems to occupy. This ability to be both a prolific intellectual student of all the philosophical minds we've mentioned so far, and also recognize the need to be in there with the people, writing plays, works of fiction, interest in sports, understanding that it's not just about these labels and groups and the socialists versus the Trotskyists and all of this, like these partitions that occur, that these things we then have to like press into what is. We have to engage with each other. We have to engage with these political systems beyond the words, beyond the labels. And that's why I think he evolved over his life, and that it's just an inspiration for us to do the same as we press into what is, regardless of what you call yourself. And that's what I'm getting, and that's what I like. Thank you.
So I was at the computer. Do you guys watch? Does anybody here watch my show, This is Revolution? A few of you. You watch the show? You watch the show, This is Revolution? You watch it? Okay, well, see, that's fucked up. You leave one of them mean comments where he's like, get that other guy off the stage. I want more Pascal. Give me more of that guy. It's fucked up. Well, at least he said it to my face. I appreciate that. You know. There was one question, Pascal, that one person asked. And I asked the few people that are watching on the live stream, should I ask that question? Mac, you know who sent the question. It was the Dizzle. Dizzle asked the question. So for you guys that know the show, should I ask this question? Okay. You know, I feel comfortable in DC. You know, I've been to places where I haven't felt comfortable. Would I ask this question in, Davenport, Iowa? Maybe not. But here I feel at home. Dizzle wanted to know, Pascal. I think you know this question. You say no. What's the chat saying, Quinn? They already know. Are these hoes loyal?
You're a child.
I've got a question. Who's going to thank Jason Myles for running this show?
Thank you. You gotta go. So I guess that's our answer, and I'm fine with that. Thank you guys. Seriously, thank you, busboys and poets. Really appreciate this. What the fuck are you saying?
I said tip, motherfucker.
Oh. But seriously, thank you guys so much. Again, I love this fucking wireless mic. I don't want to leave. But if you want to ask these dudes questions, unadulterated questions, they will be at the VIP after party. Pascal has a bedtime. He will turn into a pumpkin at a certain time. So get your Pascal questions in quick. And on that note, we are out.